Record. And so many AI prompts. Hello again. My name is Seven Song. I am talking to you from Ithaca, New York, my home for the past 40 years. And today's class is on common plants, common medicinal plants of the Northeast. In a few minutes, I'm going to switch this to a slideshow. And that's what you'll be seeing for most of today. Just a few introductions. Maybe some folks know me. I call myself a clinical herbalist. What that means is that I see people pretty regularly. I've been working in a free clinic for the past nearly 20 years. I only work for 4 hours a week, but I've been working 4 hours a week again for close to 20 years. And then I see people elsewhere. The purpose of saying that is when you see a lot of people, when you work with a lot of people and a lot of complicated health issues, what you realize is that herbal medicine is clearly just one of many kinds of medicine. So there's no point in this class, really no point at this point in my life, where I would say don't try modern medicines, conventional medicines, if they seem appropriate. They can be strong, they can have adverse effects, but of course they're life-saving. So what I'm trying to say is I work in the Ithaca Free Clinic. I work alongside doctors, nurse practitioners, acupuncturists, chiropractors. We all work in the same building. It is a free clinic. If you're interested in learning more about the Ithaca Free Clinic, just type in Ithaca Free Clinic on any search and it'll come up. I also do see people for free with both telehealth and in-person consultations. But part of what I want to say is, while I use herbal medicine regularly, and I've seen its effects many, many times being helpful, again, it is only one of many forms of medicine. I really want to move away from people being dogmatic about any one form of medicine and trying to encompass many forms of medicine. So that's number one. Let's see what else. I run an herbal medicine school here in Ithaca, New York. I'm only going to be doing it for about 3 more years, but that is in person. So if you're interested in studying with me, just go to my website, sevensong.com, and learn more about the school. And one more thing. I started working on a database years ago. So I have a free online database. Again, if you go to my website, sevensong.com, and go to Herbal Database, I really just want people to use it. Like, instead of writing a book, instead of doing other forms of media, I decided to try to accumulate and post my clinical experience as an herbalist in the form of a free database. So please use that. Just go to it and see if it's helpful for you. On that note, and with no more cookies until after this presentation, I am going to switch to the screen that'll be used for almost all of today. And now we're going to go for a different view. Sorry there. We have to get out of this. And to be one moment, for some reason, I can't get to the view that I'm looking for. This is going to be, here we go. And there we are. So this is today's class, Common Medicinal Plants of the Northeast, and photos by me. First, these are the plants that I'll be covering. I'm not going to read all the information. Some of it is in case. This is so people can review it later, online or elsewhere. So I'm going to try to cover 35 plants, and I'm hoping to do it in 2.5 hours or so. And these are the plants. I want to just start off by saying that plants have 2 kinds of chemicals within their bodies. They're called primary and secondary metabolites, or primary and secondary constituents. The primary constituents of plants are things like starches, fats, carbohydrates, proteins. So the primary chemicals in plants keep the plant alive. Without it, they cannot be a living organism. But then there are secondary constituents of plants. And these are the ones we usually use for medicine. So plants make things like alkaloids and saponins and volatile oils. These constituents are generally used to help the plant stay alive, to help it in defense, and also recruiting pollinators. So all these other chemicals, like when we think of plants as food, we think of a carrot or an onion. Often what we're thinking of them for is their primary constituents as nutrition. And when we think of plants for the medicinal effects, often what we're thinking about is these plants, these other constituents that plants have made. One of the main reasons they make these things, besides immune resistance, is plants can't walk, right? So that's the one thing. I mean, there's those weird plants that have like tap roots that kind of slowly move it around. Maybe ants exist somewhere or another. But in general, plants, in order if they want to halt insects landing on them, they can't just swing their branches. What they have to do is provide chemicals to stop things from eating them or deter them. And also, many plants need to be pollinated. So they have to have all these aromatics and colors, flavonoids, in order to attract pollinators. The reason I say it is I just think it's fascinating to divide plants up into these two categories. I'm not going to cover all these. These are some of the terms that I use throughout this class, and I'll describe them as we come to them. And some of them will be obvious, like what a flower is. And these are just more terms. This class, Common Medicinal Plants of the Northeast, is focused on plants that can be gathered or grown, but in this class, gathered here in the Northeastern United States. Many of these plants grow in many other regions of the country and many of them in many other regions of the world. So there's many plants that I'm not covering that are native and not very common. So in this presentation, I use the word abundant to mean the plant is very common, almost always non-native, and can be gathered freely without really doing any ecological harm. The next is common, which means generally locally abundant, may be native or non-native. I have to be more cautious gathering. And then the last is occasional, and those are generally native plants. And for them, like black birch trees, to gather or boneset, we have to be much more careful if we're not going to harm the environment or deplete the amount of plants in a region. So these will be part of each plant that I cover, whether they're abundant, common, or occasional. This will also matter where you live, right? Some plants are very common in some places and less in others, even in the Northeast. Here are some basic wildcrafting guidelines. But basically comes down to don't be a douche, right? And basically, like, don't harm populations of plants or exploit them in ways that will damage the ecological systems that they're in. So I'm going to read these quickly, but it's very tempting. I have to say, being somebody who's been wildcrafting plants for a lot of my adult life, sometimes you really want to go find a plant and you travel maybe a very far distance to find it, and you find patches, but there's not enough to gather. In that case, you don't gather. So it's very, you can just enjoy the environment you're in or do something else while you're there. But I'm just trying to say, you have to move away from greed. The easiest way basically is usually just if you're gathering from your friends, your family maybe. Once you go into selling plants, it gets much more difficult to wildcraft ethically. So that's one part. So as this number 2 here says, whoops. Sorry, I lost my screen there. As the second one here says, humans have been wildcrafting plants forever. I mean, before we were humans, we were certainly gathering plants for medicine. But the ecology has changed. Humans have destroyed many, many sections of the earth, and we continue to do so. So while it is an old tradition of humans, we live in an altered landscape, and we have to abide by trying to do less damage in this landscape. When you're gathering plants in an ecoregion, just think, besides the plant, what else are you changing? Like if you take a lot of plants from an area, will that harm the other insects or animals that also use that? Or do other humans also go there for food or for medicine? The next one is my don't be greedy thing. Um, After that, spend time scouting your wildcrafting or gathering sites. Like, don't stop at the first site that you see. Keep traveling until you find more sites and you know that the plant really is relatively abundant in an area for you to gather. Remember, our goal here is to get medicine for ourselves, but we also want to make sure that that medicine is there in perpetuity. Perpetuity, that's a word I don't say very often. Um, if you do wildcraft, maybe don't share where you wildcrafted, or at least some of your spots. When you don't share, like if you're the only person wildcrafting in an area, even though it might feel a little selfish, what happens is that you can see what your tactics in gathering and how long lasting they are. So in other words, if I gather skullcap in an area, a plant we won't cover here, and I know that I'm the only one there, and I come back 2 years later and there's very little skullcap, I'm thinking I should not be gathering from here. So it gives you a sense of what can be gathered and not. And the last one for this is don't gather in old growth. I mean, never. I mean, if there's any old growth left, there's very few spots. They should just be left entirely alone. And even if the area is just pristine, I would leave it alone. I like to gather plants where clearly humans have disturbed it over and over again, because those plants have shown to be survivors in these ecosystems. These are some common plant preparations. Again, since there's a lot to cover, I'm just going to put this here. Hopefully this gets recorded and posted. So these are internal plant preparations. Many of them you will know. And these are external plant preparations. Of course, plants can be taken inside your body as well applied topically on your body. And lots of the plants both are done regularly, internal and external. All right, so this is the first time I've ever done this. Ugh, to do. If you would like to make any donations to me, and then this is how to do it. If you go to my website, sevensong.com, and you go to the database, there's a button. If you go down the scroll bar in the database, there's a button for donations. You are very welcome not to donate. There are so many people and places that need money, so I'm putting this out there. But also I realize that we have scant resources in the many places that need help. The reason I am asking for donations is I give free medicines away at the Ithaca Free Clinic. The database costs me $660 a year to keep online and these online classes. And that will be enough on that. This is just the order of the plants that we're going to cover. So, all right. It's so weird to teach online. It is so separate from individual contact. Here we go. So the first plant is Blackberry. I tend to use Rubus alleghaniensis, which is just one of the most common. It is a native plant, but it's quite common. Often when you're getting into a thicket of blackberries and trying to push through, often it's this species. So there's many species of Rubus blackberries. Probably all the species of blackberry that you'll see, the roots can be used in the same way. But, if it's an uncommon blackberry, don't use it, right? Just use the blackberries. I mean, many people will pay you to extract blackberry roots from their land because they become pretty invasive. The preparations for blackberry are going to be tea, but we're going to talk about you have to boil the roots for at least 20 minutes in order to get the tannins that you're looking for. And you could also make tinctures and glycerites. The main purpose to use blackberry root is as an astringent for diarrhea. So blackberry roots and most other plants in the root family are very rich in a group of chemicals called tannins. What tannins do many things. One of the things they do is they help cells form tighter bonds with each other. They pull tissue together. That's why they're often used in wound healing. So blackberry root does not kill infectious matter. So if let's say you ate some bad food and you got some E. coli or some bacteria in there, and now you have a lot of diarrhea, right? You will need herbs to kill the bacteria. There's not blackberry root. But if you're just storming off to the bathroom on a regular basis and having a hard time because you just have a lot of frequency and urgency of watery diarrhea, what blackberry does is help astringe the colon, the large intestine, so that you don't have to poop quite as often. initially, if you have a bacterial infection, you want to poop frequently, right? The whole idea that it's not a coincidence that you have diarrhea. Your body is trying to extrude uh, negative bacteria in your body. But I work in situations and I do off the grid first aid. And sometimes people then have to go someplace and they can't drive or go anywhere because they have to poop so often. So basically, what I'm trying to say is blackberry root can be used as a butt cork. So basically, something that just stops, kind of tightens that sphincter and allows it. Initially, though, remember allowing the poop to happen, but then after a few days, when the body's still in this mood, using blackberry root. The tea is, by the way, the best. If you just make really strong blackberry root tea, you don't want to drink it for very long, though, because excess tannins drank internally can decrease nutrient absorption by causing the cells in the intestines to be tighter, thereby deriving the food in the lumen of the intestines to actually make it into your circulatory system and spread around. So that's it. The bottom part is just notes. The blackberry roots, of course, blackberry fruits, of course, are delicious. And they can be difficult. I've tried to gather blackberry root, and it's hard sometimes just because they have big thorns. This is the leaf of a blackberry. So blackberries are usually three-leafed. Later, raspberries are usually more than three-leafed. Let's be specific. So this is one leaf. Each one of those appendages is a leaflet. So not always, but often, blackberry plants, as opposed to raspberry plants, which we'll see later, have three leaflets per leaf in a kind of palm-shaped. So that's number one. That's one way to identify blackberry. The raspberry also has some of the same effects. These are the inflorescence. An inflorescence is a group of flowers. A flower is an individual, a flower is an individual reproductive structure, and an inflorescence is a group of flowers. The word inflorescence will show up many times here. This is an individual flower. Blackberry flowers, like many things in the rose family, have 5 petals and many stamen in the middle, and many carpels in the middle of that. So these are the thorns of blackberry. And I want to just note how woody they are. They actually have cambium going into them. So basically, a thorn and a spine are different. Raspberries have spines. Blackberries have thorns. Thorns are basically modified branches, while spines are generally modified leaves. So if you've ever worked with blackberry and raspberry, you'll notice that it's much easier to cut yourself on blackberry because basically these are branches that have been shrunk down to the size of a very sharp thorn, whereas raspberries, since they're basically modified leaves, they come off much easier. They're not nearly as sturdy. Our next plant is black birch. Black birch is Betula lenta. Black birch is a native tree to the Northeast. Um, it's occasional to common. Often, actually, if in parts of the forest here, if they get logged, black birch will come up early if there's enough other trees around it. It's the inner bark of black birch that's used for medicine. Um, and just a note, like I just never take plant material off larger trees. Like I'm just so glad there's still larger trees around. So anytime I'm gathering black birch will be from much smaller black birch trees. And every time I mention trees throughout this presentation, do not gather bark while the tree is alive. Like what you want to do generally is cut a branch off. You don't want to strip the bark off the trunk of a plant because that leaves it pervious to getting infections. So anytime I mention trees or shrubs in this, you'll take a branch off the plant and take the bark off that. You still have left an opening in the tree, but a smaller one than removing a lot of bark. So black birch, you could dry the inner bark for tea. But one thing about black birch, after a couple of months, it doesn't really have much, I think it doesn't have much medicinal quality to it. We'll get to why in a minute. And then there's all these other aspects you can make. So tinctures and glycerites, and then liniments and compresses would be internal uses. Black birch is an anti-inflammatory. I think the next time I do this, I'm going to reorder these, how I put these in order. So basically, black birch reduces inflammation and is pain relieving. It also is called sweet birch and other common names. All these plants have other common names. So black birch is used internally and externally for inflammation. So for instance, I mostly use it internally. So after somebody has something like Lyme disease, which goes into a chronic inflammatory state, let's say in their joints like their knees, black birch will be one of a few plants that I will give them regularly for the medicine. You can also, if you hurt your knee and you wanted to do it externally, you can make a really strong tea from the fresh plant bark and then apply that in a compress or a poultice, usually a compress on top of your knee, in order to reduce the inflammation. So it's really useful. And black birch just has one thing that I think particularly wonderful, and that it's rich in methyl salicylates, which is the smell of wintergreen. Personally, I like the smell of wintergreen a lot. So there's other plants like the plant wintergreen is also rich in methyl salicylate. And you'll hear that word salicylate in methyl salicylate. And if you know that aspirin is salicylic acid, that's also based on salicylates. So salicylates are compounds found in a bunch of plants that have anti-inflammatory properties like willow. And then some plants have methyl salicylate, which I find a little bit stronger as an anti-inflammatory, and they'll easily be known by their by the smell, by the wintergreen smell. Any plant with salicylates or methyl salicylates should be avoided if the person is allergic uh, or intolerant of aspirin. And one thing you may or may not have known is that methyl salicylates are a known compound for plant-to-plant communication. It's one of the reasons probably they developed this chemical. So when the plant is injured, the smell, the methyl salicylate, the volatile oils go into the other plants nearby, other trees, which then will increase different defensive compounds in them. So pretty fascinating and pretty well understood this point. This is often when people talk about plants communicating. It's not that they speak English, they do not. But they do communicate, and they communicate often through chemicals and other means. So black birch is a great plant. I particularly like it for any soft tissue injuries as well. And that would mean sprains and strains, both internally and externally. Uh, Also, if you just live near it, if you take a young twig and just chew on it, you get to have that hayseed effect, plus that really nice flavor of wintergreen. Now we look at a few pictures of the plant. The yellow leaf there is a black birch leaf in autumn. This is a tree, this is an old tree. And one of the really easy ways to tell black birch is the fragmentation of the bark as they get older. I don't think any plant in the Northeast has this much like weird fissuring and fracturing of the bark. This only happens in older trees. In younger trees, they look like this. Very smooth bark. And those white horizontal lines, those are its lenticels. And that's how barks breathe. So we often hear about plants taking in carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen, but plants have mitochondria, and mitochondria need oxygen. So these lenticels, these white stripes in the tree, and found in most woody plants, take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide. Basically, they're very small pores for gas exchange in the woody parts of plants. It's also one of the easy ways of telling black birch when they're young. There's really only two plants where the lenticels, the white lines are so common. That's cherry trees and black birch. The next plant is blue vervain. So blue vervain it is a gorgeous plant, as we'll see in a moment. The main parts to use for medicine are leaf and the flower. Often when I get it from other people, it has pieces of the stem, and they have some medicinal quality to them, the stem, but the leaf and flower, I think, has more. The problem is, though, you have to gather a lot of plants to gather that much leaf and flower, depending on how much medicine you're making. Blue vervain is an occasional wetland plant. So every plant here, that's a wetland plant, and we have lots of wetlands here in the Northeast, Your consideration is not just gathering the blue vervain, but how to not disturb wetland environments. So some wetland environments are already quite disturbed, and you'll see lots of non-native plants growing in them. So that's where I would gather these plants. But wetland plants, wetland environments have been notably destroyed for agricultural and development reasons in the US. And we want to maintain these areas that are often beautiful and full of plant diversity. I think the best ways to take blue vervain are tincture and a tea. It's very bitter. It's kind of just bitter, bitter. Like I have in my own mind, there's bitter and then there's yucky, right? Because I can take bitter, but some plants have like a yucky factor on top of the bitter factor. I would say blue vervain is just bitter. But you here who drink a lot of tea, often I think you make your distinctions between the different flavors. Blue vervain is just a really excellent anxiolytic and nervine. Anxiolytic means it helps with anxiety and often generally refers to taking a plant as you're anxious to help you. The word nervine is very closely related, but tends to mean a plant that you take over the course of time to help your nervous system have less anxious fluctuations. So many plants really are both, right? You take a lot for one effect and smaller amounts regularly for a different effect. But in my practice, I would say blue vervain is just one of the herbs that really helps with that kind of mind can't stop running anxiety. I do think it works better as a nervine than an anxiolytic. In other words, I think taking blue vervain on a very regular basis for days, weeks, and months will help some people get not quite as anxious. I mean, it's an anxiety producing world. So, but I think it helps people stay a little more stable and not go to the more anxious parts. So if you find that you're somebody that has your mind careening and you can't stop the same thoughts, and that's disruptive to your life, I would take blue vervain. There was other plants I would consider taking to like reduce it at the moment, but blue vervain for the long-term duration. It's considered safe. The only thing people don't like about it usually it's its flavor. And it is gorgeous. If you want, grow it in your garden. So grow it around your house. As we'll see right now, look at that. Man, that is a beautiful plant. Uh, Here's a few more. I had to reduce some of my pictures of some of these because I'm just like, oh, every picture of blue. It's hard. Like, you don't have to be a good photographer to get good pictures of blue vervain. Another one closer up. And now we're going to move off blue vervain. We're going to go to another wetland plant that often grows near blue vervain, and that is boneset. Boneset is Eupatorium perfoliatum, and it's the leaf and the flower that are used of boneset. And it's pretty much the same thing I just said about blue vervain, I would say about boneset. It's a wetland plant, so be very considerate about wetland environments. Um, and don't over harvest it. So you could grow it. I'm growing some around my pond, but you definitely, it's a plant that wants to be, its feet near water. Boneset is often very bitter. It's often bitter as well. It's not often, excuse me. Boneset is bitter, and so some people can drink it. A lot of people find it hard to get down, and you can also use the tincture. Boneset has antibacterial and antiviral properties. I think it is one of the best herbs to use for respiratory viruses, often with other plants that I won't cover in this class. But, if you have a cold or a flu, um, so it's not the answer, right? I mean, there's some very strong flus going around right now. There's lots of medications that might be important. But if it's not so severe, I would suggest it. I don't take it as a preventative medicine, and I wouldn't take it as a preventative medicine. So I say boneset for when you get sick, as soon as you know you're sick, like you wake up and your throat hurts, you're getting snotty, any of the symptoms that you have showing that you're going into a cold or a flu, I would consider it. Here's the problem. In some recent studies by people that I trust very well, they have found some pyrrolizidine alkaloids are present in boneset. So pyrrolizidine alkaloids are that same group of chemicals that are found in comfrey you have to have caution using comfrey. Lisa Ganora did some excellent free classes on Comfrey online. If you type them and find them, she has, it's the best thing I've ever heard anybody talk about the reality of using Comfrey. So that's Comfrey, not Boneset. And so having looked through a lot of the literature and having friends that are do this better than I do, it looks like Boneset seems reasonably safe if you keep it under 2 weeks and only use it if you don't have any liver disease. So if anybody that has any liver disease, hepatitis or cirrhosis, I would just avoid it. There's no documentation of it doing damage at this point, but I mean, it's pretty clear that it has these pyrrolidine alkaloids. It's a useful plant, so you might want to not use it if you don't want to take a chance. Though what I recommend is using it. I usually have it in combination with other plants. That doesn't reduce the alkaloids, but it means you're getting less per dosage. But again, I think keeping Boneset to 2 weeks or less would keep it fairly safe. But if you have any consideration, don't use it. That would be my suggestion. So even though I have for antibacterial, mostly I'm really using it as an antiviral and pretty much just for respiratory viruses at this point. It's just how I've learned and used it. The white flowers are Boneset. This is a wetland. Aren't they gorgeous? Actually, everything looks gorgeous because we just had a whole bunch of sleety ice. So it's just that kind of weather outside, not this. This is another picture of Boneset. And here's why it's called Boneset. The leaves, it's very, very unusual. Teasel does this as well, where the leaves like not only wrap around the stem, but they attach to each other, basically forming one leaf. So that's the Boneset, meaning it looks like if a bone set and attached to itself. Also, it's very hairy. If you see that. That's Boneset. By the way, I can't actually see if people are doing any chat, so I see some, but I'm just going to run for this because once I go, I get sidelined. It takes me a long time to come back. Next, we have burdock. It's the root and the seed that are used for burdock. There are two very common, abundant non-native species. We'll look at pictures of those in a minute. And burdock is non-native. But here's the problem. So you can gather it freely. But like for every plant I mentioned here, if you're gathering the roots of that plant, if the plant is growing in a polluted environment, roots can definitely accumulate heavy metals and other toxicities, other toxins from where they're growing. So a plant like burdock can grow in some very disturbed soils. So, but it also will grow, in gardens and, I mean, it grows in it always grows in disturbed soils, but not always in toxic soils. So burdock can be gathered freely, but if you're gathering it and you're near some train tracks or just any place where near a roadside where heavy metals accumulate, I would just not gather the roots of that plant or really any plant. Burdock, burdock can both be used internally and externally. So we have internal medicines like tinctures and teas and capsules, and then external oils and salves. Burdock can basically be broken into, changed or divided between the roots and the seeds. First, the roots are edible and nourishing. They're just a straightforward food. Gobo, the root, which I don't see sold that much anymore, is basically a form of burdock or a different Arctium species, though it's grown, in soils that accommodated to get bigger and juicier. Whereas if you gather in the wild, they might be stringier than that and more woody, depending what time of year you gather them. But anyway, the roots of burdock tend to be used for liver health. So they're not going to make a very big change, but it looks like they improve the liver functionality over time. So if your liver is taking a hit, you've gotten some sickness that's affected liver, you've eaten some chemicals and you're okay, but your liver is taking a long hit, or even some diseases like hepatitis, and you're taking other medicines for the hepatitis, but also you want something to more gently nudge the liver to proper health, then burdock root is a good choice. It's just a very safe liver tonic. It's also used for rashes. And I haven't seen this in any good clinical studies, but my guess is that it's good for rashes because some rashes probably have to do are disruptions of liver function, where instead of toxins accumulating and getting uh, excreted from your body in your feces, they might be getting excreted in your skin, creating eczema-like situations. So burdock root, though, tends to be used internally for these chronic rashes, for liver function, and because it's a diuretic, it'll increase urinary output. So why would one want to increase urinary output? We're going to see many plants here are diuretic. One reason you would want to increase urinary output is if you have a urinary tract infection. So if you have bacteria growing in your bladder or your urethra, you want to continually wash those bacteria out. So burdock doesn't kill things. If you have a urinary tract infection, you also want herbs to kill the bacteria. You would want herbs to increase immune surveillance. And then you would also put something like burdock to increase the frequency of urination. Um, the, I know with urinary tract infections, often people have to pee a lot, but sometimes by emptying the bladder more fully, there's less of a sense of frequency and urgency with urination. Um, and the seed tends to be used more externally. So the seed is often used externally for rashes, generally in an oil or salve form. And that's it. They're both pretty similar. Probably the seed has some similar liver tonic qualities as well. It's just a very safe plant. Um, I would suggest caution when gathering the plant because the involucres, we'll see in a minute, can get your hair and get in clothing and just, there's that Velcro-like substance. But even more so, I'll get to it when I show the photo. Um, and so this last note there, it says sticky involucres make cute pins. If you take a burdock seed head and you stick it, I'm wearing cotton right now, and you stick the seed head on then you could stick flowers into the seed head and you get a little like vase attraction on your lapel. So just proof that occasionally I do something besides medicine with plants, but mostly I just make really bad tasting medicine. So this is greater burdock. We have two burdocks here, greater and lesser burdock. This is the greater. Those are the purple things are the flowers, the purple and white. And then the involucres are the structures underneath it. This is greater again, but I want to go to this. So this is a close-up. This is in winter, but you can see that those thin structures have a little barb. That's what gets caught in your clothing and your hair. And it's true that the person who invented Velcro, but didn't make any money inventing Velcro, that he was using this. If you go to Wikipedia, you can find the inventor of Velcro and the whole process. He found this on his dog and then tried coming up with a substance that can, synthetic substance that you can do this with. So we got the greater burdock. And here, the greener parts are the involucre before they turn brown. Involucre. The involucre are the surrounding bracts in a couple of families like the Asteraceae. And here's a picture of the greater and the lesser burdock. Both can get pretty tall, but generally the lesser burdock, Arctium minus, has smaller flower heads. That's the easy way to tell them apart. But medicinally, they're the same. But actually, when you see them, sometimes if you see them growing near each other, which is not uncommon, if you're interested in identifying them. They look a little different. So this is Megan. Hi, Megan. Any pictures with human beings on here? I got a very express permission to put them up. I'm pretty cautious. So this is not a COVID time. So Megan was here 10 years ago. But what happens in Megan's hands, those are burdock seed heads, involucre. And it's not just the stickiness of them. Each seed is surrounded by hairs. Those hairs, when you're separating them, they fly and they can get stuck in your lips and your skin and your clothing. She's wearing a jacket of mine right there. So these little hairs don't get all over her clothing and into her face, and especially they tend to embed in the lips. If you're interested, on my website, on my blog, I did a whole blog. I think it's called Resting Burdock Seed with W resting. Because it's a whole trick to get the seeds out of there. Anyway, um, so we're avoiding getting the seeds, the hairs of seeds, making skin. This is the seeds of them. It's kind of tasty. Next, we have calamus. So calamus, there's two species of calamus that grow here, but I've only ever seen one. So there's a native calamus called Acorus americanus, and I don't have any pictures because I've never seen it, but I would never gather that plant because it's not very common. All the times I've seen calamus, and I've seen it many times, it is always the non-native calamus. And I'll show you pictures where I feel like it's very gatherable. But if you might want to learn the difference between them, which is partly in the leaf. So one way to tell the difference. So I gather the non-native calamus. I gather the rhizomes and the roots. Rhizomes are the parts, underground structures of plants that spread it horizontally along the soil and store constituents for it to last for many years. Roots go down and anchor the plant and pull up nutrients and water. I'm saying this because rhizomes and roots are different things. And frankly, with calamus, the rhizome has most of the medicinal energy going sideways, horizontal to the soil line, and the roots don't have so much. The reason for that is the rhizome is it's the most important part of the plant to live, to spread the plant year after year. So basically absorbs and holds many different constituents to grow new plants every year and spread itself. Calamus is occasional, but sometimes you'll find it in big colonies. I'll show you photos from this region and where it can easily be gathered. There's lots of preparations. Famously, people make honeys and candy with it, but it is candy is just a weird word for surrounding a flavor sugar. Um, so it is not chocolate chip cookies. It is a very strong flavored plant. And I don't know, you could read recipes, but I would mostly use it in tincture or glycerite. Mostly I use calamus only internally. And as Jim McDonald would tell you at any point, because it's one of his favorite plants, it just really has a lot of uses. Here I want to focus on two, for digestion and for mental clarity. I think that calamus is probably one of the few herbs I see regularly that helps ground people, help them focus and concentrate if that's what they're looking to do. For instance, I run an herb school, and anybody like this will happen to you during the course of this, especially online, is after a while it gets hard to focus, right? You're staring at a computer screen or even somebody in live, and the mind drifts. And for some people, it drifts a lot, and it's very hard to stay focused on what's being presented, though they want to. And taking calamus, I think sometimes has kind of a grounding, focusing way with it, where people can stay more focused for a longer period of time. I also use it regularly when a disease or an illness decreases focus and concentration. Lying being a particularly pernicious one. A lot of people, after having Lyme, find that their memory is not quite strong and they have a more difficult time finding words. And so calamus, as a part of a couple of other herbs, can be really helpful with that. It's something I see help very regularly. It is a very strong flavor, though. So, use it with other herbs or dilute it. One way to do that. There's some safety concern because it contains beta-acerone, but there's no reported histories of human beings being poisoned. If you take beta-acerone and inject it into rats, it can disrupt. I think it causes liver cell cancers. But so that happened. But the amount of beta-acerone in calamus and the amounts that human takes looks like it's pretty safe. But I'm letting you know this because you want to take your personal safety is your personal consideration. So you can read the studies on it. But most of the herbalists I know, as opposed to something like Boneset, looks like it definitely can pose a risk after a while. Calamus actually looks pretty safe unless you just start eating roots. And if you could eat a lot of these roots or rhizomes, you got something else going on because like eating just small bits of it for most people is hard to get down. All the plants in the foreground there are calamus. All of these plants here are Calamus plants. The background is a different plant. So you can see that it grows in large colonies. This is what the leaves look like. There's Calamus is sometimes called sweet flag, and then there's a plant called blue flag, which is an iris that does have leaves that look like this and also grows in wetlands. But you don't want to ingest blue flag. You don't want to ingest irises unless you know what you're doing. They have very strong medicinal action, very strong flavor, very pungent. So I'm just pointing out that sweet flag is calamus, blue flag is iris. I'm talking about sweet flag or calamus. This is the rhizomes. Um, and you actually can't see any roots in here, but that's the rhizomes. The roots would be underneath and new plants growing from it. And this is the interesting inflorescence. If you know your inflorescences, it looks a little bit like skunk cabbage or jack in the pulpit, which it is related to, not very directly, but indirectly. So inflorescence is a group of flowers. Each one, you see each one of these little yellow spots, that's a flower. I mean, there's hundreds of flowers on that stem, on that. Spadix. Spath? Spadix. Next, catnip. Catnip, it's the leaf and the inflorescence, the flowering tops that are used. It's a common plant and it is non-native. It can be gathered freely. There's no threat to the catnip population. It might annoy your cat if you take all of it. My cat, no longer around, loved catnip, though liked catmint a little bit better. Tea and tincture and glycerite. Catnip has a pretty strong flavor to it as well. Nothing like calamus, but it has like a musty flavor. So if you're giving it to especially like a child or just somebody who's resistant, I would give them a glycerite. Planting glycerin rather than tincture or tea. But anybody who's used to plants, it's pretty easy to get down. Catnip has a couple of really useful aspects to its medicinal qualities. It's helpful for digestion. It's a nervine, an anxiolytic, and it can be helpful for menstrual pain. It's not very strong, but some people find it very helpful. So where catnip really shines is when anxiousness and stomach aches go together. So if you're somebody that your stomach hurts when you're anxious, I suggest catnip. There'll be another plant that we'll talk about later that's also good for this. But also, it's just good for bloating, stagnant feeling in your digestive tract. It just eases the digestive tract, and it seems really safe for people, for anyone, frankly. The flavor is the only thing that's going to make it more difficult. And some people will take the tea or tincture or glycerite for menstrual pain, often with other plants, and feel it's very helpful. And of course, some cats really enjoy catnip. So it's helpful for the nervous system. It's a mild nervine. This presentation is going to have a lot of me making that noise. It's helpful for menstrual pain. Not one of the strong herbs, but a nice gentle one and easy to take, and as much as you want. And it's a great digestive for pain, for flatulence, basically your basic stomach ache and anxiety with a stomach ache. Here's the inflorescence close. Pretty. Most flowers are really gorgeous when you get up close. In fact, I don't know any ugly flowers. Our next one is chickweed. Chickweed, the whole above ground plant is gathered. And that's how it grows. It grows kind of, we'll see pictures, grows along the ground. It could be abundant. It's non-native. And it can be gathered as much as you want. I mean, it is here to stay. Worldwide, chickweed is actually one of the more common weeds in many, many parts of the temperate world, colder parts. Chickweed comes up in early spring and again in fall. I find the spring chickweed a little bit better, but you want to gather the plant when it's succulent. What'll happen is chickweed will come out and, like sometime in May, and you have a couple of weeks where it's very succulent, and then it's going to dry out over the summer. And I would gather it during its succulent phase. I don't use it when it's dried. Chickweed is used both internally and externally as an anti-inflammatory, a demulcent, diuretic, and other aspects to it. Um, it's mild in its anti-inflammatory effects. Here's what it looks like. It looks like chickweed reduces irritation of the skin. Like to put it in non-technical terms, that's what it looks like chickweed does the best. So it's often used in lotions, salves, and infused oils when the skin is irritated with eczema or psoriasis. It won't stop those problems, but it can stop some of the itchiness of those problems. You might still have the plaquing or the rashes, but it's very, very safe. Um, that's one way. It's also used for hemorrhoids externally. So depending on if you can reach the hemorrhoid in salves, um, and also used for irritated eyes. Sometimes you have to be careful because there's bacteria on it, but sometimes I've seen people just crush it up because it's very crush upable and just put it on an irritated eye to help reduce the irritation. I am suggesting that, also saying you do have to be careful because all plants have bacteria. I mean, all things have bacteria on them, so that could be something to be cautious about. So basically, chickweed is soothing to skin, soothing to the mucosa internally, but it doesn't kill anything like so many plants we're talking about. And you can get a sense of what kind of dressing that I like from this last statement. So it's delicious. I do like ranch dressing. I am not a purist in any form, but chickweed is really tasty. I mean, chickweed is the beginner's first edible plant because it is basically it's very lettucey in texture and flavor, meaning it's mostly water. So it's also just nice if you're just working outside and you're just dry, you can just chew up some chickweed and it'll help moisten uh, your mouth. This is it growing in one of my whole frames, except for those dandelions as chickweed. I definitely did not plant the chickweed there. Here's their very pretty flowers, succulent leaves. One way to identify chickweed, which is related to a couple of other stitchworts, is it has this line of hairs that grows along the stem. So you can look for those line of hairs. It doesn't always have them, but usually does. And this is the biggest Arizona. And that is the biggest tangle of chickweed I have ever seen. So I know this is plants of the Northeast, but I could not resist. I mean, that just looks like something I would want to, instead of a pile of leaves in autumn, this just feels like something I'd want to jump into and just lay in this moist bed of chickweed. Um, the next herb is cleavers. So cleavers, there's a cleavers is Gallium apiarine. There are many native and non-native species of gallium that grow in the Northeast. I suggest just using the one that we call cleavers because because it's the most obvious to identify. And I don't really know if the other ones have the same use. Some people say yes, other people don't say anything. So I would just suggest if you're going to use it, learn the distinctive features of gallium apiarine cleavers compared to the other ones. The other ones are generally called bedstraw. Um, it can be freely gathered. It's weedy. It will continue to be weedy. Like other plants, it will definitely grow in polluted environments, so you don't want to gather it from there. Has moist stems, probably pulling up all kinds of stuff from the soil. Medicine could be tinctures or tea or a pressed juice that's preserved in alcohol, which is the strongest way to do it. Basically, you get a bunch of cleavers, you juice the cleavers or whatever juicing, and then add 20% alcohol to preserve the juice. Or you can just drink it. It's very bitter. And so cleavers is basically, this is a tricky one. I don't really know if it's a lymph cleanser, which is often what you hear. I'm not really even sure what a lymph cleanser means, but I would suggest taking cleavers internally when you have non-complicated enlarged lymph nodes. When your lymph nodes are enlarged, something is generally going on in your body, unless you're one of those folks that just always has enlarged lymph nodes. So if you have enlarged lymph nodes, your question is, what's going on? If you have an infection, Cleavers is not going to kill any infection. You don't want to reduce the inflammation. You don't want to reduce the swelling of your lymph nodes when you're sick because your lymph nodes are swollen because you're making more T and B cells unless your lymph nodes themselves are infected. So I want to say is I do suggest cleavers for as a lymph aid, but I would say make sure there's not something else going on. So here, when would you use it? So you got COVID or you got another infection, and you pass the infection, but your lymph nodes are still swollen, but you feel good, everything else, all your test scores or whatever come out good, then it could be used. Um, Part of the problem here is I find the use of cleavers a little ambiguous. So I've read enough where I feel like it could be helpful here, but there's other places where I feel like people are using cleavers where I feel like they should be using something to kill infectious matter or getting their lymph nodes checked out. But it is considered safe, and we'll see what sticky tomfoolery looks like in just a few slides. So here's a patch of cleavers. They actually just tumble down. They're standing up because they're leaning on each other. And they have these barbs. Well, I don't have any photos of the barbs. They have barbs that help it stick, which is why they cleaved. Here's a picture of the whorl leaves. Here's a picture of the four-petaled flower. It's related to coffee. It's in the same family as coffee, the Rubiaceae. And here is Vanessa showing sticky tomfoolery with cleavers. So, all right. Next, we have dandelion. So dandelion is obviously a very abundant plant. It's non-native. Like all non-native, be cautious gathering it in polluted environments. You could take it in different forms, teas, tinctures, capsules. And the leaves and the roots are used a little bit differently from each other. The roots are used as a liver tonic to increase bile formation. You want to increase bile formation if you're having difficulty digesting your fats, which need bile to break them down and also to absorb them. And in general, it's just considered a good digestive aid. So that's the root of the plant. The leaves are basically used as a diuretic to increase urination. You might do that if you have edema and you know what's going on with the edema, because edema could be due to like a sluggish heart, which needs other considerations. But if you're just holding a lot of fluid in your body, dandelion leaf is is a really useful diuretic to move that fluid out. The plant is considered very safe, and it's got to be one of the most well-known plants, and also well tolerated, and also strikingly pretty. Here's a field of it. That year in particular was gorgeous, around Cornell. The flowers, that's the involucre, the part surrounding the flowers. Some of the involusols, the involu go face downward and some face upward. This is the latex. This is what really gives it the very bitter flavor. It's the latex from the dandelion stem and leaf. And this is me describing all the parts of a dandelion. The next herb is elder. The botany on elder is pretty confusing. So right now, the elder that I'm talking about is generally considered Sambucus nigra, but many books will call it Sambucus canadensis. Some books will call it Sambucus nigra subspecies canadensis, but they're all the same plant. And there's questions whether this is native or non-native shrub. But it's pretty common. Probably, I'm sure lots of them are native. The parts that are used are the flowers and the fruits, and they're used pretty similarly, though I find some distinctions between their uses. There's lots of preparations to use them, tinctures, teas, etc. And its most common use, both the fruit and the flower, is an antiviral for respiratory viruses. So, like Boneset, this is a classic respiratory virus. I don't know why it's just given, I guess it's given to children because the fruits taste better. And so you can make an elder syrup, which is more adult and child friendly as far as flavor. And diaphoretic means it helps you sweat. So you would use a diaphoretic, an agent to increase sweating, when you're sick, you have an illness, and you feel like you need to sweat, like you feel like your body temperature is rising, but it hasn't reached the sweat point. Because once you sweat, often you'll get exhausted afterwards, but that sweating and fever process can help promote getting better. So you feel like you're feverish, the kind of fever is stuck in you, and you want to kind of induce that perspiration. I suggest using the flowers. I think the flowers have more of a diaphoretic sweating action than the fruit. And it is very safe. So you can take a lot of it. If the cytokine storm thing was ridiculous. So I'm not, you can read about it elsewhere if you know about that. And the fruits are used for food and mead. There is a red fruited elder, Sambucus racemosus. I There are herbalists that use it. I haven't. I would say avoid it unless you know somebody and work with them. But we have basically this dark colored fruited one and a very red fruited one. Just use the dark colored fruited one, purplish really. Um, and yeah, they also look different even when they're in flower. I only have pictures of the Sambucus nigra. This is Sambucus nigra, another lovely plant. I'm growing a couple of cultivars out in my garden. The deer's eaten most of them down though. Flowers, uh, flowers gathered, and then the tedious next step of removing all the flowers from all the pedicels. And here's the fruit. They're actually kind of odd tasting, I think, the fruit. Like I'll eat a few, but it's never like I'm eating an apple or something that just feels like yum yum yum. Next plant is Elecampane. Don't worry, we only have like 20 more to go. So Elecampane is really interesting in that it was uncommon. Like I've been living in Ithaca for 40 years now, and somebody unmuted themselves somehow. Um, so I've been living in Ithaca for about 40 years, and there's just a few places I can find it. And currently it's starting to spread pretty fast. Like I planted a few in my garden, and now it's growing even where the grass is very thick. So what I'm saying here is, please be careful about plant. What am I really saying? I really like growing Elecampane. It's a very showy plant. I just like what it looks like, but it is definitely spreading in many places where I mow to keep it down. So just be careful. I have friends that have a farm not far from here, and it took over a lot of their fields. And that's new. It used to not be spreading so much. Anyway, Elecampane is common, non-native and spreading. Um, it can be gathered freely. It's the roots that are used. Around here, it just keeps coming back and spreading itself. There's a number of preparations that it's useful for. Again, I plan on posting this so far, so I know I'm not going over everything, every like preparation, etc. Just take a lot of time. Then I wouldn't have so much time for all these little asides. Um, and it's just one of the better respiratory anti-inflammatories. So during COVID, we went through so much. I mean, during COVID means now as well. But during any time you have a respiratory inflammation, anytime you get a cold or a flu, really just flus, colds don't usually cause this, and you find yourself having a hard time breathing, not because it's hard to breathe up here, but your bronchi, but because it's hard to breathe from your lungs. Often it'll be painful to breathe. I would consider Elecampane as a tonic. Of course, if you're having difficulty breathing, it might be very important to seek out medical care, right? Because breathing is very important. But if you get you get checked out with the stethoscope and everything seems fine, you still have difficulty breathing, I would say one thing to consider would be taking Elecampane, and I usually use it in tea or a tincture. Excuse me, I don't usually use it in tea. I don't like the flavor that much. You can give it a try. I usually use it in tincture or glycerite um, for the medicine. So the substance called inulin was named from this plant, inula. Inulin is a starch that's found in a number of plants, often in the Asteraceae, like dandelion and burdock and Elecampane all have this starch compound that helps them stay alive over the winter called inulin. And that's it for this. Let's look at the picture. So an anti-inflammatory for lung health. And it seems pretty safe. Usually you have to take it for a while. It's not something that works right away. It's something that you build up with. It's a tonic. Here's a picture of the right. Those very showy flowers. This is it, the winter. You can see those brown involucrals pointing downward, and the pappus, the hairy bits, showing its relationship to dandelion. And this is a field of it near my home. It looks, I know it looks like mullein, but that's Elecampane. And here's the roots. They're really very, very interesting roots, the knobby roots of Elecampane. Next, we have goldenrod. In goldenrod, it's the leaf and the inflorescence. Remember, inflorescence is the group of flowers. There are pretty much all goldenrods here are native, but they grow in great profusion in areas, so they can also be freely gathered. There's quite a few species. It takes a little bit of work to distinguish the different species. Just in my home alone, there's probably 4 species growing in this region. And there's probably like 7 or 8 common northeastern species and some other ones. So what I want to say is there are some that grow in the sun in fields, and there are some that grow in the woodlands in shade. Leave the woodland species alone to grow. They don't tend to be used for medicine. And also, you can disrupt the ecosystem. The field ones, it's easy to just cut down a swath of them, where you're disturbing the native ecosystems when you're gathering them from the forest. So gather your field goldenrods. And again, many species, probably all could be used the same. Teas and tinctures and compresses are used from the medicine. The plant is used as a diuretic, as an antioxidant. That's because it's rich in flavonoids. Its most common use is for allergies. And it's also dermatological or skin and eye aid. So it's used for urinary tract infections for excretion of urine, not to kill the infective organism. It's commonly used for allergies. I think there are some stronger plants that will cover one of them here for allergies, but goldenrod is also used. It's also applied topically for wound healing. I have to say, I have not done this yet. So most of the things I have clinical use of, but I've just read a lot, and it's just so common. It seems silly for me not to be using it more. But it's used for wound healing. And also it's also used as for conjunctivitis. Often a strained tea is made and put into an eye cup. And the eye cup is used for conjunctivitis. You want to make sure that your water is sterile. So conjunctivitis in an eye cup. And of course, it could be very easy to gather. And they are beautiful. This is the grass leaf goldenrod, which is a different genus, Euphemia. One of the flowers flat along the top. When they're along the side, they're solidago. One way to tell your goldenrods is often these balls that you'll see around them. That's actually the larva of a kind of fly or midge inside of that. I would suggest learning more about them. I've written extensively, lots of people have, but this is a goldenrod ball gall, and often you'll see them on the goldenrods. This is the flowers of late goldenrod. Very pretty. This is a patch of goldenrod. This is the flower of tall goldenrod. All these are very common here. They do look somewhat alike. This is the wrinkle leaf goldenrod. I don't think I've ever called it that. Solidago rugosa. And this is a woodland goldenrod, zigzag goldenrod. And these are the ones I'm saying, please leave alone. There's no reason to gather them. There's lots of field goldenrods. Also, I've never seen anybody use them. Next, we have hawthorn. So hawthorn is the genus Crataegus. It's in the rose family. And most of its parts are useful medicinally. The fruits, the leaves, and the flowers. They're all rich in this group of chemicals called flavonoids. If you're interested, I would look up flavonoids. They're present in almost all plants. And they often contribute to the antioxidant activity of plants, which makes lots and lots and lots of plants useful that way. There are many northeastern species of hawthorn. I can't identify them. I have a friend this year, Bob Wesley, who hopefully will take me out on a walk because I can't tell one from another. I haven't said I feel like it's a bragging moment, I guess. I'm also a botanist, or at least a self-taught botanist. I love identifying plants is really it, but the hawthorns, difficult. So they can be pretty much gathered freely. The problem is there's often a rust. A rust is a kind of fungus that grows on them that makes them ungatherable. So it's uncommon, and that rust has become more prevalent here in upstate New York, or at least around Ithaca. And then you can't gather it if the rust is on there. I don't really know what it will do, but I don't take that chance. Lots of ways to prepare them. You can make jams out of the fruits. You can reduce the the fruit into powders, teas, glycerites, tinctures with the leaves and the flowers. And basically, it's a cardiovascular tonic, and it's a relaxing herb, a nervine. So it's another for this. So if you're somebody that's anxious a lot and have a hard time relaxing, consider putting hawthorn flowers in your medicines on a regular basis, in tinctures or teas. Um, and I would say hawthorn is the most famous for its cardiovascular toning effect. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't bring down high blood pressure unless your high blood pressure is within a reasonable, unless it's not too high. So don't expect hawthorn. If you have, blood pressure that's, I don't know, 160 over 95, it's not going to bring it down. But what it will do, maybe medicines or other things necessary to bring your blood pressure down, is cardioprotective. It helps the heart being a better functioning muscle, probably by being an antioxidant within the heart muscle and reducing some of the stress and pro-oxidation that happens with such a hard working muscle. The heart is a very hard working muscle. So I don't think there's anybody that wouldn't benefit from its heart action. Not everybody needs. So if you're hypertensive or have other cardiovascular diseases, I would suggest taking hawthorn as part of your medicine to just keep your cardiovascular system more strengthened, more resilient, to use a very common word these days. So it's really helpful, but again, it's not going to do miracles about bringing blood pressure down from high numbers. What it's going to do is going to make your heart a better working muscle, hopefully. And then it can be taken regularly, especially the flowers. It's just a relaxing agent. It's really safe. Those thorns are a problem. Um, I haven't seen it interact with any medications. I'm not going to move into that. That's a whole other section by itself. So if you're taking, for instance, everything I just said, you're probably already going to be on some kind of ACE inhibitor, calcium channel blocker, or beta blocker. And the question is, can you now take hawthorn if you're on these medicines? And the answer is tricky. Not going to answer it here, but I've not seen it negatively interact with those drugs yet. But please be serious and cautious with yourself. The fruits are sometimes edible, depends on the tree. And if it's something you haven't done yet, if you know there's some hawthorn, smell the flowers when they're in flower. And you will be surprised to find they smell like kind of rotting meat. I guess it's not really, they're stinky. And they're stinky because they attract carrion insects. Insects that are attracted to dead animals. So you're getting flies and beetles. So instead of like butterflies and bees pollinating them, you get the insects that are attracted to that smell to pollinate them, meaning things like beetles and flies. I think it's surprising because, as we'll see, they're quite pretty, but pretty and smelly don't go to, and aromatics go together differently. This tree, this one year, I gathered so much fruit, as you'll see, because there was no rust on it. The reason it's shaped like that is because animals are eating the lower branches. Those gray ones are hawthorn trees without their leaves. I think they might be dying, unfortunately. They grow near me. The bark gets very craggy when it gets older. Look at those thorns. Isn't that amazing? Like, it's like every direction you get thorned. Lovely. Here's the flowers, the stinky flowers. The pink is the anther, the part that makes the pollen. And this one year, I was able to gather so much fruit. It was lovely. But usually it's covered in rust, and I would get a fraction of that. Our next plant is horse chestnut. Interesting, these two were growing near each other, that hawthorn tree and this horse chestnut tree. So Buckeye is a kind of horse chestnut that I don't use. So there's a horse chestnut is a non-native plant to the United States. It's planted. A close relative it is Buckeye, like Ohio is the Buckeye state. That is the same genus Aesculus, but a different species. I only use the non-native horse chestnuts. I've met people who do otherwise, but I have not. I'm not suggesting it. The part that's used is the seed, um, and not the whole fruit. I'll show you pictures in a minute. Uh, and it's a non-native plant. It usually doesn't come up from the seed, so you can pretty much gather the seeds where you see them coming out. Often they're on streets. Horse chestnut is a very common street tree because it's quite pretty. It's used both internally and externally. So you have tinctures and capsules used internally, and liniments, which is an isopropyl-based preparation, isopropyl alcohol-based preparation, and oil used externally. And the main thing that horse chestnut does is for weakened veins, not arteries, but veins. So in other words, it could be helpful for varicose veins and varicosities. It can be helpful for chronic venous insufficiency. That means your body is having trouble bringing fluid from your legs back to your heart via the veins as opposed to the lymphatic system. And so because of this, it's just really useful. So basically, it's helpful for edema due to poor vascular tone. So we've got to separate here. Sometimes your veins can't bring fluid back up to your heart because your heart is not a strong enough pump. This is not for that. This is if your veins are weaker, the flaps might be not as strong, and so your veins, the tension and strength of your veins is weak, and that's where this plant is helpful. So that's one place. And so you see how it's used for hemorrhoids because some hemorrhoids are also based on uh, because going towards your anus, you have veins, and sometimes they're not carrying the blood back. The blood starts to pile up in these veins, and you get hemorrhoids. In this case, you would use it externally and internally. And for all these, it could be used internally and externally. There's actually, for some reason, there's lots of research on horse chestnut. A lot of it is on clinical trials, and most of it looks very good and very safe. So these are serious problems. But this is something to try. Remember, you're strengthening the veins, not the heart, if you have chronic venous insufficiency here or varicose veins and edema. So don't eat the seeds. It sounds silly to say, but maybe someone would. But they're rich in saponins. They're going to cause stomach aches, and they're just beautiful. I planted one. Hopefully, I mean, probably in 30 years, maybe it'll be tree size here. There's one right there, Lakes National Forest. This is the bark and looking up at the tree. This is why it's planted as a street tree. They're lovely. The leaves are palmate, very unusual and opposite. It's very unusual to have palmate or all these leaflets coming from one leaf and also opposite each other. Makes it very easy to identify. And this is the seeds in the shell. You don't want to step on them. They're very spiky. And it's the chestnut name. They're not related to chestnuts, by the way. Chestnuts are in the oak family. Horse chestnuts are much more closely related to maples. They're in the same family as maples, but different uses. And then here's a bunch of them. Gathered them, and now I'm drying them. I don't dry them fully because the inside will always be a little bit mealy. The next plant is horsetail. Um, Horsetail is in genus Equisetum. Equi means horse, like equestrian. Setum means bristle or tail, horsetail. It's horsetail is one of the oldest family of plants on Earth. So if you ever look at pictures of dinosaurs or images of dinosaurs eating these very tall plants without leaves, they are relatives of horsetail. So horsetail makes spores, not seeds. In other words, horsetail developed before insects were around to pollinate it, so it's wind pollinated. But horsetails are basically over 100 million years old, so pretty fascinating, just a very old school group of plants. They have very wide geographic regions because they're pre-Pangea. Pangea? They are during Pangea. So while the continents were all connected, horsetail was growing. So when they separated, it just moved them. So you'll find a lot of the same species here and in parts of Europe or Russia or China. I'm just going around the northern hemisphere here. So it's the whole above ground part that's used. Pretty much generally they could be gathered freely. They're very common. You're only gathering the above ground part anyway. The plant spreads itself along in rhizomes underneath the soil. That's why you find big patches of it. So it could be common to abundant. I think all species are native. Mostly they're used as a skin and hair aid. I would say almost out of all the plants I'm covering today, I find horsetail one of the most difficult to figure out really what is it used for. So one place I have seen it used helpfully is in skin and excuse me, hair rinses, often combined with other herbs. So after somebody washes their hair, you put this in if your hair is thinning out. It doesn't surely doesn't always work. I know that from experience with people. But for some people it does work. So one place to consider using horsetail is making a strong tea with it with other herbs. If you're on my social media, I've written about this combination previously. And then after you wash your hair or just get your hair wet, you basically put the tea and just leave it in there. And it seems to help strengthen the hair roots so there's less hair loss. Um, and it's supposed to help with body remineralization. So for like nails and bones. I haven't ever found any good clinical proof of this. It seems like a fairly safe herb to take, so it's something to consider. There's some literature saying that it helps with kidney health. The nephrons or small blood vessels in the kidneys can be helpful there. Again, I'm not really sure how much it is, but it's something I'm actively studying, and I do give to people because it seems safe. Uh, the plant is rich in silica. Silica is basically the stuff that makes up dirt. So the plants definitely can accumulate heavy metals, so gather them from safe places. And there is some concern that very high amounts of silica taken internally could damage the kidneys, the opposite of helping the kidneys. Nobody's seen this, but it is something that's speculated a lot. The real question is, one of the big things is silica, when we take it internally, does it actually get absorbed at all or just come out basically with our feces? A lot said there. What I'm saying is I use it as a hair rinse, and I have given it to people where it seems like they're interested in for bone health, for bone growth, though I've never really seen it be that helpful for that. But again, it has long historical uses in many parts of the world, so I'm looking at that. Let's look at some plants. Uh, this is the most common species. This is a weedy species. Um, and you'll find it growing in gardens. And again, that's just one plant growing underneath the ground. So this is Equisetum arvense, our common horsetail. Arvense means of the field. This is the whirl of leaves that you'll see. They're not really leaves because of technicalities in botany. Uh, this is the part that comes up before it's green. You see these bits come up. That's what releases the spore. So this is the fertile shoot of the horsetail, which doesn't photosynthesize, so it's not green. So if you're out in early spring, you see these in your garden. These are the predecessors to this. So they're not the same plant. So what happens is first these come up, and they back, and then these come up. And these are photosynthetic shoots that are going to take that sun and carbon dioxide and water, and they're going to make sugar and put it into the root systems and keep the plant alive. This is another horsetail, Equisetum hymali. I don't use this one because arvense is just the most common. And here's something you don't have to do, but I like it. You can actually take these pieces apart and put them back together. It's just like a puzzle. So I can pull this upper part out of that lower part, and then I could put it back in. I mean, the purpose of that is to have fun with plants. They're also interesting looking and colorful. Our next plant is Japanese barberry. Japanese barberry is probably, and its relatives, are probably the plants that I rely on most in first aid, and we'll go in why for a minute. So they're rich in a substance in an alkaloid called berberine. And berberine is what gives it the rich yellow color. So I like the roots of this plant the most of Japanese barberry because they have the richest in berberine. But if there's a lot of yellow in the lower stems, you can also use them. But really, the root is just strongest. We'll see in a minute. So Japanese barberry is a non-native, very abundant, especially in the Catskills regions, the Hudson Valley region. This plant takes over large areas, so it can easily be gathered. I'm sure people would pay you to be able to extricate these plants from their property. Um, so not threatened in any way, not Japanese barberry. Other related plants are. There's lots of preparations you can make with them internally and externally. And I like it for because it has antibacterial, antiviral, and antiprotozoal. So Giardia, for instance, is a protozoa. It's not a bacteria or a virus. And it's also a blood sugar aid. So this is all due to the berberine in the plant. It's used internally and externally. And basically, for almost any infection, it's a plant that I'll give somebody. If it's a virus or something internally, if they have a staph infection, it'll be part of a protocol to be used externally. But here's a very, very important factor. Don't use it in pregnancy. It can cause uterine contractions. Avoid in pregnancy. Just avoid in pregnancy. So besides that, it seems pretty safe. It is very strong tasting. It's a very bitter plant. And it also can help with insulin resistance. So it's not used for type 1 diabetes, but for many of the different kinds of type 2 diabetes, often in conjunction with medicine. So if somebody's taking metformin or another medicine and their A1C is the number still, you can add either berberine or you can add the plant berberis. This is the plant. And sometimes you'll get that number a little bit lower. It's going to start taking some of that sugar out of the bloodstream and into cells. I usually combine it with other plants to do this. But at this point, the science is actually pretty good on this. Berberine has been studied pretty extensively as a blood sugar aid, meaning for insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So we have it kills with blood sugar regulation. So the killing a bunch of stuff, it's a first aid plant. It's used pretty much, if you ever heard of Oregon grapefruit, it's used exactly like that, except this one is weedy and not native, whereas all the Oregon grapefruits are native, and it grows here. So I don't know if I'd suggest growing it, by the way. It can spread and it's very spiny and makes dense thickets. So this is an individual plant, and this is my friend's home that recently he got a front loader to just start getting some of it out of there. This whole property is covered in Japanese barberry. Uh, these are the flowers. Here's the fruits. The fruits are great for photography. I mean, it's just so easy to capture a good fruit picture with this. And then look at that yellow, huh? So this is the root. So in order to chop this, it took a lot of us to get it out of the ground. And I'm definitely using a large axe to chop it up and then get into smaller pieces and do other things to get into smaller pieces. But look, this is not like the yellow. That is the yellow of the plant. Next, we have Joe Pye weed, also called gravel root. Both are very common. I think most people call it Joe Pye weed. It's the root and the rhizome that's used for medicine. And there's a lot of plants that were formerly in the genus Eupatorium that were changed to Eutrochium. So if you ever heard the plant like Eupatorium maculatum or Eupatorium purpureum, that's the older names for Joe Pye. Now it's Eutrochium purpureum and Eutrochium maculatum. Basically, if the plant has more than 2 leaves per whorl, it's now a eutrochium. So the one I mentioned here, it really shouldn't say eutrochium species. Eutrochium maculatum, one of the Joe Pye weeds, is really common up here in the Northeast. It is native. It's a wetland plant, all the things I've said about wetland plants, but it often grows in colonies because it's spreading underneath the ground. So I would say be cautious gathering wetlands, but the plant is more than boneset and black and blue vervain, which I've talked about. This plant is denser and there's more of them. So please do not overharvest, etc. But usually you can gather them. Also, you're gathering the root, which kills the plant. So the root and the rhizome. And I don't know how necessary it is because it does what a lot of other plants do, and that is it's a diuretic. So it's used in things like benign prostatic hypertrophy, BPH, when the bladder gets swollen and then urine gets stored in the bladder. Sorry, I'm going to say that again. In BPH, the prostate gets swollen. It scrunches down on the urethra, which causes excess urine to stagnate in the bladder, which increases the need, the frequency and urgency of urination. It's similar in effect how it feels to a urinary tract infection, where it feels like you constantly have to urinate. And often people with BPH, anybody with a prostate will maybe get it. With benign prostatic hypertrophy, is often people have to get up 5, 6, 7 times a night to urinate. So one thing to do, it sounds contradictory, but actually taking a strong diuretic a few hours before going to sleep and emptying the bladder more completely often gives a kind of a sense of relief and makes it easier to sleep longer in the night. So diuretics are sometimes used, even though the person has a lot of frequency and urgency to urinate, by helping rid that excess urination, excuse me, excess urine in the bladder, so there's not that feeling of incompleteness. So it's also used for edema, as long as it's a safer form of edema, and for urinary tract infections. So it's a diuretic. Uh, Again, there's lots of diuretics. It'd surely be easier to gather dandelion leaves, but it's another one that I've used mostly for BPH. Joe Pye weed is the name for a bunch of plants, well, 3 plants that are related. But around here really only see Eupatorium maculatum. So here we go. This is Eutrochium maculatum. So if you're in a wetland, you'll often see this. The purple all the way to the left, that's different. That's purple loosestrife. It's the taller pink ones that take up most of the frame. Here's the showy flowers of it, clearly related to dandelion. Here's the whirl of leaves, why it changed from Eupatorium to Eutrochium. It was just, the reason they did that is because there were just too many Eupatoriums, like hundreds of them. So they broke it up basically into other genera. This is the one that's in all the books, Joe Pyeweed Eutrochium purpureum, but this does not grow up here. I just have some pictures of it here, but this does not grow here. I have it in my garden. One of the ways to tell the difference is this purpling at the base of the Eutrochium purpureum. But here's a comparison. You can see that the one that grows in the Northeast has a lot more flowers per inflorescence than Eutrochium purpureum. I don't really know. This is probably not that necessary because Eutrochium purpureum doesn't grow in the Northeast unless you grow it. That's the root, though, of the Joe Pye weed, Eutrochium purpureum. So just to recap. So the Eutrochium purpureum, the Joe Pye weed, that doesn't grow in this part of the world. I just have some pictures there because I think that root looks like a lizard when I look at it. But around here, we have Eutrochium maculatum that could be used the same. That's the Northeastern one. Next, one of the trickiest of the plants is Lobelia. There's a number of species of Lobelia, but I just use Lobelia inflata. So I don't use the other Lobelia species. There's some garden varieties as well, some cultivars. For medicine, the whole above ground plant is used when it's in seed and flower. They do happen at the same time. It is a native plant, but it's often pretty common. It's also an annual. So what will happen is some areas will just have a lot of it one year and then not in future years. I generally find it along logging roads. That's where I find the most of it. And so I think it could be gathered, but you want to leave plenty of plants to help it reseed itself because it's an annual. The internal preparations are tincture and vinegars, and the external preparations are liniments and oils. Lobelia does a number of things, but it does one thing remarkably well, and that is it's a bronchodilator for asthma. So it's not as strong as albuterol. It's not an anti-inflammatory like Pulmicort and all the other steroid inhalers, but it can be used similarly to albuterol, depending on the severity of the difficulty with breathing with asthma, taken as needed. Basically, there's 3 things that happen during asthma, making it difficult to breathe. And one of them is the bronchi, instead of being wide, are more narrow. And this relaxed bronchi, breathing can be easier. It's one of the few herbs. It's one of the few herbs that I find. Um, what am I going to say? The effect of the effect of lobelia can be fairly immediate. It's very, what's the word? It's really helpful. Like most of the plants I give, you don't really see an immediate effect. But with lobelia, for somebody having difficulty breathing, and if it works, which it does a reasonable amount of time, it happens pretty soon. You give them, usually give them like 10 drops at a time of the tincture, sometimes dilute. It is acrid. If it hits the back of your throat, it'll cause some irritation. We'll go into that in a minute. All right. So the first thing about Lobelia inflata is to be used for difficulty breathing, but you're still within a safe zone. I mean, you don't need your emergency inhaler yet. You're trying something previous to that. Again, though, I've written extensively about Lobelia if you want more descriptions about how to use it. But in first aid, it's a primary. Whenever I do first aid, there's always people coming by who have asthma and it's not as severe. It looks like Rena, maybe you're unmute if you can mute yourself. I think sometimes the green box goes down there. I'm not sure how that's happening. I'm going to keep talking now. Um, so it's basically an allergy aid, mostly for asthma. Uh, and it also, though, it helps certain kinds of headaches. I don't really know which kinds of headaches specifically, but sometimes when people have intractable headaches, sometimes a few drops of lobelia will relax them. And used in conjunction with other herbs for anxiety, it can increase the efficiency of those other herbs. What I'm trying to say is somebody's anxious and they have a very high anxiety, and you're giving them like the herbs that you would give them for relaxation. And it helps, but you want to kick it up a little bit. You want to kick up this formula. Add about a fifth of a part of lobelia into that tincture, into the formula they already have, and often you'll find it working better. Basically, lobelia has effects on the parasympathetic nervous system. And because of that, it has multiple effects in the body. It might help with headaches. It might help with spastic pains. And it helps with breathing. So it's a pretty useful plant that has lots of uses. But I really, for right now, I just want to reinforce this idea of one of the better plants used immediately for people having difficulty breathing due to bronchoconstriction due to asthma. One place I haven't used it and want to use it, so I'll just mention it. It's often used for if people have really spastic, like leg cramps or something, people rub the tincture or liniment on them and find that it helps, but I haven't tried that yet. When you're prepared, so the plant though is acrid. When you're preparing lobelia as a medicine, if you're handling the plant a lot and you're cutting out the plant and kind of the juices, put it in a blender, like the vapor that comes off the plant can definitely irritate the skin. I mean, it's happened to me a few times. So if you're chopping up large amounts of lobelia to make medicine or putting in a blender, make sure your face is not above the blender when it's on so the vapor doesn't go in there. And you might consider wearing gloves while chopping it up. Lobelia has a reputation of being very dangerous in the amount and causing vomiting. So I've never seen anybody vomit, though I've given it to many, many, many people. I have met one or two people who said they vomited from it. So it seems like a possibility. It is a possibility, but it's uncommon in the amounts given. Again, I would say for an adult, give it in 10 drop increments as often as needed over the course of time to help with people breathing. For the anxiety, it's usually such a small part of the tincture, the formula, that it doesn't usually have any negative effect. But I find it relatively safe in the amounts that I'm suggesting here. And be careful when processing the plant, especially in a blender. There it's where I got the most, like my face just got red and irritated. So smaller amounts taken regularly to help with breathing. You can try it if you have headaches and nothing else works. Try small amounts of lobelia. Anything can make headaches worse. Headaches tend to be very sensitive, especially to smells, flavors. And consider using it with formulas for anxiety. Pretty useful plant, amazing plant. Here's the plant. That's maybe a foot tall. Picture of the flowers. I just like what the plant looks like. One way to tell this plant, you see how it kind of looks like it's open up towards the base, like there's no petal there. It's called fenestration in botany. That's one way to tell your lobelias. They kind of have an opening. That's a way for insects to get in there and pollinate them. It's called Lobelia inflata because the seed pod, which is what you're looking at, are inflated and bulbous. So inflata meaning inflated, as you can see here. And this is just me making making lobelia tincture and just naming everything that I have there. The next herb is meadowsweet. Meadowsweet is Filipendula ulmaria. The parts used are the leaf and the inflorescence. It's non-native and occasionally grows in really dense stands, which make it very easy to gather a lot of. It makes a tea, a tincture, and a glycerite. And I have to say, out of almost all these plants here, meadowsweet is probably one of the better tasting ones, partly because it's rich in methyl salicylates, so it has a slight wintergreen flavor, but in general, it's just not a very strong flavor. Meadowsweet is an anti-inflammatory, and my favorite use for it is for gut inflammation and pain. So if you've eaten something and your stomach hurts, or if your stomach just hurts a lot, or really anywhere in your intestines, this is a place where I really like meadowsweet. Tea, tincture, or glyceride all work well. It's really safe unless you're allergic to aspirin. Avoid all methyl salicylates and salicylates if you're allergic to aspirin. So it's a general anti-inflammatory, but frankly, the main way I use meadowsweet is for gut pain. And so not so much for gas. Other plants are more carminative and help remove gas. There's more for just pain in your digestive tract. So you might use it, for instance, if you have irritable bowel syndrome with pain. It's not going to really alter diarrhea or constipation. It'll just help with the crampiness that's going on. But it is a basic anti-inflammatory. This is one pack, really, which makes it great. You can gather a bunch here. And most of the plant is underneath the ground. So if I gathered even all of that, which of course I don't, it would still come up the next year. These are the shiny leaves. They're compound leaves made of leaflets. And this is just some that I've gathered about the process. And then we have our next herb. We're supposed to get freezing rain today, and it looks like that's about to happen, which will make life pretty miserable trying to walk or drive for a little while. So the next plant is Motherwort, Leonoris cardiaca. Cardiaca potentially because of its effects on the heart. And I'm not sure why named after Leo or Leonoris. It's the leaf and the flower of the plant that are used. It's non-native, pretty common. Often I find it growing in gardens or other more rich soils. So it can be gathered freely in non-native plant. Again, since it's often growing in gardens, also less polluted areas. And it has a couple of interesting uses for it. So basically, it's an anxiolytic and nervine. As you can see that usually they are both, right? So an anxiolytic, take as needed, nervine to take on a regular basis to help with anxiety. It's considered a cardiac tonic. So again, like with Hawthorn, you're not using it to bring down blood pressure, you're using it to strengthen the heart. But for here, it's specifically used for people who have heart palpitations. So it looks like its real job here is working on the nervous system innervation of the heart. So in other words, helping control those electrical signalings that might increase palpitations or the heart beating faster or slower, faster. And it's also helpful for premenstrual symptoms. So some people find it premenstrually for pain, but it's specifically for anxiety associated with menses or anxiety associated premenstrually. It's also used for hyperactive thyroid conditions, though it's hard to tell how well it works there. But the important thing here is do not use motherwort if you have hypothyroidism. thyroid conditions. So if you have Graves' disease, you want to avoid Hashimoto's, excuse me, not Graves', Hashimoto's. If you have an underactive thyroid, avoid Motherwort because it is used for hyperactive thyroid. The preparations it's pretty much always used internal teas and tinctures and glycerites. It's pretty bitter. So avoid with hypothyroids. But here's what I'm saying. Like, if you're just somebody who's anxious and wants to add something new to your repertoire of anti-anxiety herbs, I would consider motherwort. If you're somebody who has anxiety associated with menses, I would consider motherwort, or anxiety associated with menopause, another place. And those are some of the main places. So it's hot. I would say I compared it to Hawthorn a minute ago. I would like to dissect that. Hawthorn looks like it's making the muscles of the heart work potentially better, strengthening the heart muscle, the myocardium, where it looks like motherwort is more geared to helping somehow with the nervous innervation of the heart. So again, used for heart palpitation, but can be used for heart palpitations, but generally used on a regular basis. And with anything with difficulty with the heart, of course, you also want to be medically checked out to make sure that your heart is okay. The last thing I say is the calyxes just get really sharp. So if you've ever motherwort, as it ages, because when you start walking in it, to get really sharp and pointy. You'll see. It's really easy to grow. Here's a motherwort plant. These are the leaves. You can see that the leaves over ghosts are wrinkled when you look at them closely. These are the flowers of motherwort. You can see its relationship to catnip. I mean, they're in the same family, but that's a typical mint flower. And this is the calyxes. So this is where the flowers originally were. And then as they get older, the calyxes, the parts that surround the flower, just get really sharp. The plural of calyx is calyces. Next, we have mullein. Mullein is a non-native, very widespread and common plant. I think out of all the plants that I see spread around the United States, there's a few that are non-native, but I think I see mullein in more areas than most other plants. I mean, it doesn't grow in the desert, but it grows in high mountains. It's really common, but it really loves disturbed gravelly soil. That's where you really find your mullein, disturbed gravelly soil. The leaf and root are both used, and they're used differently. It can be freely gathered. It's a non-native plant, unless you want to see more of the plants. I just use it internally, and so far I just use a tea or a tincture. And I mostly, frankly, use the tincture of mullein. So it's used both as a respiratory aid and a bladder tonic. So let's start with the respiratory part. So the leaf of mullein is used for respiratory inflammation. It seems to reduce, I don't really know if it reduces technically inflammation, but if people's lungs hurt when they breathe or they're coughing a lot, and everything else checks out, I probably won't have to say that all the time, but I would say one thing to consider is mullein as tincture or tea. So in other words, you have COVID, you're post-COVID maybe, but still you have this cough and your lungs still hurt on a regular basis. I would consider using mullein on a regular basis, tincture or tea. It helps with the coughing, it helps with the pain, and it might help with respiratory inflammation of the lungs. It's not an asthma remedy. The root is entirely different. The root is a bladder tonic that can help with urgency with urination. So if you're a person that like, oh, I have to pee now, otherwise you might pee yourself, this is a plant to try. It, of course, does not always work. It doesn't really work for BPH, which I talked about, because that's the prostate getting swollen. But if there's no frank injury to the bladder, you're just somebody that the bladder sends signals, really urgent signals to you when your bladder starts to fill up with fluid, urine. It's a plant to try. So I give it to many people, and there's a reasonable percent of those people that it works for. Basically, they take mullein regularly once or twice a day, and they have less urgency to urinate. I've never seen it be problematic, like stop people from urinating. So the root is a bladder tonic for urination urgency, and the leaf is a respiratory tonic. I guess I could talk about the flowers another time. If you make a tea with this plant, um, you have to be careful. Like it's a very hairy plant, and if you make a tea and those hairs go into your water that you're drinking, they will definitely irritate your throat and make you cough a bunch. So strain your tea really well. And the plant is super easy to identify. Here is a group of mullein plants in the Adirondacks. This, I just had to put one of these in. If you haven't been there, I haven't been there in like 14 or 15 years. The Glass Flower Museum in Cambridge, or is it Cambridge in Boston, around Boston, is amazing. Like that is a glass mullein plant with the stamen and other parts also glass and much more enlarged. It is so incredible. Also, you can look for them at I mean, you can also just find them online, but seeing them in person, I just couldn't believe like the skill that went into these glass flowers. There's a lot of history to them. Anyway, it's I think it's at Harvard. It's in one of the museums associated. I'm getting a yes from somebody, so yes, go there. I want to go again. It's been too long. Here's the flowers of mullein. Very pretty. Not that hard to take out though. Leaf, and there's the root. I like to tincture the root when it's fresh. The leaf I'll use dry, but I like to tincture the root fresh. Our next plant is nettles. Nettles, the main part used are the leaves and the underground structures. The underground structures are rhizomes and roots. Do not use, well, I'd say avoid using the native nettles. Like if you, in the Northeast, we have Laportia canadensis or woodland nettles. I just usually avoid gathering too many woodland plants. This Urtica dioica is non-native and tends to grow in sunny fields and disturbed soils. It's fairly abundant and can be gathered freely, though if you ever gather nettles, those stinging hairs can make it a little less freely gathered. Mostly I use nettles internally, and there's lots of ways to prepare them: vinegars, capsules, tinctures, teas, etc. It does taste pretty good. Nettles is very green tasting, very spinachy tasting. So it's a pretty easy drink to drink if you like spinach water or pot liquor. Some of its main uses is a diuretic, a prostate aid, and just for its nutritional value. The leaves are very diuretic, so they will increase urination. So again, for UTIs or BPH. The rhizomes, the underground structures, the rhizomes and roots are also diuretic, but they seem to have a specific action for decreasing the urination events, the frequency in urine, I'll try again. The underground structures of nettles have a tonifying effect on the prostate for BPH. So if when the prostate gets swollen, it gets harder to urinate because the prostate is a capsular gland that tends to grow inward rather than expand outward. So as it grows inward, it starts to strangle the urethra. This causes retained urine in the bladder. That retained urine tends to send signals to the brain that you have to urinate, even though there's not much urine in there. So, but I think, and there's a reasonable amount of science, it also seems to help the prostate somehow. So it's not just emptying the bladder, but over the course of time, there is less of this urgency. So nettles rhizome is one of the main herbs I use for anybody with BPH, though they do have to take it on a regular basis to help with this, especially getting up at night to urinate. Again, like some people might have to get up 6, 7 times. With nettles rhizome taken regularly, sometimes it's just 2 or 3 times. It doesn't usually stop it entirely. It's easy to grow, though I planted it in the wrong place in my garden, and now I can't grow anything else there because it's just a big nettles patch. So be careful where you plant it. Nettles seed and leaves, of course, are food as well as medicine. And their fibers can be peeled off the stalks and used for whatever things people do with fibers of plants. So it's pretty useful. The seeds are tasty if you gather the seeds, which also have medicinal value, and then you roast the seeds. They're tasty. They have a lot of oil in them. Here's some nettles plant. These are all Arnica dioica. Here's a group of leaves looking escherish. Escherish. This is the fluorescence, not very showy flowers there. You can see the flowers are white. And this is the roots and the rhizomes. They're pretty easy to gather. They're not very far underneath the soil. So, washing it it takes more time than gathering it. We're up to oak. We're in the letter O now. So please like oaks are native trees. They're beautiful trees. So far, there's no infection killing them like half the other trees around here, but who knows what will happen next. So the main medicinal parts are the inner bark and then the leaf. The inner bark has more medicinal properties, but the leaves can be used for similar uses. I tend to just use white oak because that's the most common oak around me. That's Quercus alba, but it can be difficult unless you're trained in plant identification to distinguish the different oaks. But here's what I'd say. Only gather oaks that are very common. And again, do not peel bark off of live trees. If you're going to gather it, either gather a branch or something, or gather a branch. That'd be the easiest way to do that. I'm hoping to do a wildcrafting class within the next few months where I can cover all these things in more detail. So oaks are used externally and internally. And the main constituent are tannins, which we've talked about, which help skin cells adhere, make tighter bonds with each other. So good for wound healing. I often use them if like somebody had some infections in their foot and we clear up the infection, but there's just a bunch of open sores on their feet. Then we'll make really strong oak baths and soak the foot, or oak soaks, and soak the foot in the very strong oak tea. It will help the skin mend. It is not, if you have a wound, it's also not bad because tannins have antioxidant properties, but what it doesn't have is really strong things to kill bacteria, which is what's usually inhabiting external wounds. So we have using oak for foot soaks or other soak wounds. Also add herbs to kill any infectious matter in there. They're really an excellent thing if you have bleeding gums and your gums are soft and mushy and bleed easily when you floss, or other times. You can do tooth rinses with oak, where basically after you brush your teeth or floss, then you rinse your mouth and keep it in there. You swish with the oak, and that'll help tighten the gums. And those are some of the things you can do really any place where you're trying to help the skin mend. People also do it if they have larger pores and then on their face, and they make a face wash to help reduce the size of their pores. You wouldn't want to do the opposite. I mean, if your skin is dry and tight, oak is not what you want. It would be the opposite, right? You'd want emollient, things that soften tissue. So this is going to be more like moist skin, larger pores, but also for wounds. And they're lovely trees. So it's considered safe. The only thing about anything tanniny is you don't want to drink a lot of it regularly. I mentioned this because it can tighten the cell walls in the small intestine, which would decrease nutrient absorption. I'm not really sure how much you would have to do for that, but it's a consideration. So, and they're beautiful trees. Let's look at some. This is some of my students gathering some white oak from a friend's land who cut down the trees for us, which was really nice. This is the oak bark after it's peeled. This is the inner bark. We've taken off the outer bark. This is oak leaves. One thing about oak leaves is the underside of them is glaucous or waxy and not as green, as you can see here from this picture. Though, again, it can be difficult to tell your oaks apart. There's just an oak tree. They're so gorgeous. And this is a red oak, which is, it's just amazing that plants do that. I don't tend to use red oaks, but they also are rich in tannins. Next is plantain. It's really a marathon session, eh? What do you got going here? All right, doing all right. 2 hours in. So plantain, there's 3 species that are common. 2 are native, excuse me, 1 is native and 2 are non-native. So the parts of plantain, mostly I'm focusing on here, are going to be leaves. So of course, this is not banana plantains. That's a different plant. I don't know why they have the same name. So we have two non-native. We have Plantago lanceolata and Plantago, um, what's the other one? Plantago lanceolata. I'll come to it in a minute. Maybe I am going too much into this. Um, and well, it's right in front of me, isn't it? And Plantago major. So these are your non-native ones. But there's one that looks a lot like it that is native. That's Plantago regulii. The reason I'm saying this is when I've gone to classes, people often say all these plantains are non-native. That's inaccurate. The Plantago regulii is actually native, but it's very common, and you find that mixed in with these other plantains. So all of them can be gathered. They can grow in polluted environments, so that warning for that. Um, and they can be used both internally and externally. Basically, they have a soothing effect on tissue with a mild anti-inflammatory properties. So they also tend to draw things out of the body. So if you have a splinter that's not too far in, you can do what's called a spit poultice, where you take plantain leaves, any of these, you chew them up and you apply it topically and maybe hold it in place. And sometimes it will draw the splinter out of the skin. Um, it could also be put on post wound to help heal, but this has a softening property, kind of the opposite of the oak. Oak is tightening. This is softening. So it's better if you have more like rash considerations rather than wounds. So let me just change that. So if your skin is irritated, rashy, eczemaceous, or psoriatic, it has rashes, this is a better place to use plantain, usually in lotions, oils, or salves. And it can be helpful for coughs, especially dry coughs. So it has a mild anti-inflammatory action. It has a soothing effect on skin, a little bit like chickweed, but different constituents. It can help draw stuff out, only if they're close to the surface, though, and helpful for coughs. Could be put on top of bee stings, and those are some of the main uses of plantain for me. It's really safe. You'd have to like choke on it, like take enough to choke to have a problem with it. And it's just a really common first aid plant. It's well known. Um, I would say there's no lookalikes, but all plant it depends on how tuned in you are to know what plants look alike or not. Here's the narrow-leaf plantain, Plantago lanceolata. The one way to tell the difference is the inflorescences are pretty tight. So in this narrow leaf, if you look at the very top of the stem, that's where the flowers are emerging. This is what the flowers look like. But then on Plantago major, instead of looking at the leaves, notice how the inflorescence is much longer on the stem. So with Plantago lanceolata, just a small part of the stem is the flower stalk. And on Plantago major, much more of the flower stalk has the flower stalk. Hopefully I can keep going here. There's more inflorescence on the flower stalk here. And then this is the native one. Looks just like a major. One way to tell the difference, though, is the reddening at the base of the leaf. So this is Plantago regelii, our native plantain, but it's also very common. I don't think it's an endangered native plant. Often I see them mixed in together when I'm looking around. To really know the difference, you have to look at the seed capsule, but the red base is helpful. Next, we have ragweed. Whew. Ambrosia artemisia. This has got to be one of the most hated plants in the Northeast. It is native, but it causes more allergies than any other plant. That is just straight true. The pollen is just hyperallergenic. Many people have allergies. When they breathe the pollen in, it will cause allergy symptoms: sneezing, runny eyes, runny nose, all the symptoms of allergies. It can be gathered freely, and I'm going to show you some extensive stands of it in a minute. So gather it before it flowers. When you want to make the medicine, you want to avoid pollen being in your medicine. So gather it before it flowers, which gives you weeks to gather it. I'll show you some pictures in a minute. I only use it internally as a tea, but mostly I use it as a tincture. So very weirdly, very ironically, this is one of the only plants I know that what it causes, it helps. I know you hear this statement, plants that grow near each other can help each other. I don't know if any of that's true. But what is true here is that ragweed causes lots of allergies, and it is one of the few plants that has a strong antihistamine action and counters allergies effects. You can go anywhere you want with why that is. So basically, ragweed leaf tincture is to reduce allergy symptoms. So runny nose, runny eyes, sneezing, coughing. I haven't used it as much for hives, which is a skin reaction to it. So can you use it if you have allergies? And the answer is yes. Uh, there's no allergenic component to the leaf. All the allergy component is to the pollen. So during pollen season, because it's airborne, it's a wind pollinated plant, you might want to wear a mask, generally in August. But the leaves do not cause this at all. I've never seen an allergic reaction to them. So if you have allergies, I am weirdly but telling you to try ragweed tincture, even if your allergies are to ragweed, because it has an antihistamine effect. It's not specific to anti-ragweed effects. It's an antihistamine-like effect. It helps with some of the symptoms. I'm gonna try that one more time. If you have allergies, consider trying ragweed tincture. Make sure there's no pollen in it. I don't really think the pollen would matter. The pollen has to go in your nose to cause the allergies. Here we are. That is a field of ragweed. But for many of my friends going there, every plant you see there, until you get to that lighter green in the back, all that is ragweed. Here's what it looks like, a single plant. This is the stage where it's making pollen. Here's the plants when it's young and you can gather. That's the leaves of ragweed, not the clover that's kind of towards the front there. This is the female flowers, which is called the pistillate inflorescence. These are the male flowers. You probably get like 4 or 5 of these on a fingertip, and that's where the pollen's going to come out of. So that's the stamen producing area of the ragweed. It's on the long stalk. Like it would be, if you see this, like the whole long stalk, it looks like it has little bumps on them. That's the male flower. The female flower is tucked into the leaf axil. So that'd be the female. You see the smaller. They don't cause allergies. And this will start to produce the pollen that many people have allergies to. This is giant ragweed, which is actually uncommon up here, more common in the southeast, but it also causes allergies. There's actually a bunch of ambrosia species. Next is a deep breath. And then a cough, and then a sip, and then a hiccup. Next is raspberry. There's a bunch of raspberries, all in the genus Rubus. Blackberry is also in the genus Rubus. And I use the raspberry leaf a little differently than I use blackberry. So I tend to use blackberry root, as we talked about, for its astringency, especially for stopping diarrhea. For raspberry, I tend to use the leaves. There are not native and non-native species, and they can be very abundant, especially in sandy soils. In the Adirondacks in particular, I just see huge stands of raspberry leaves, often in logging operation areas. Um, it's unclear. Probably most raspberry leaves have similar properties, but I tend to use this one called Rubus idaeus. It is the most common of the raspberries. Again, they can be kind of difficult to identify, but if you're in the Northeast, and when you see photos, and it looks like these photos of large stands, usually it is the species. So I use it internally. You could make syrups and honeys with the leaves, of course, the fruits as well, but also tinctures, teas, and glycerites. It's mildly astringent, and it's another one that I have a hard time figuring out exactly how it helps. It tends to be used as a tonic for problematic menstrual cycles and as a pregnancy tonic. So a menstrual and pregnancy tonic. I think the idea is if somebody's having a hard time carrying to term, is taking raspberry leaf tea during pregnancy. It seems safe in pregnancy. So anytime I say that, you are welcome to check it out yourself, but it does have a rich history used in pregnancy, as do many plants. So I put it in here because I know a lot of people who might have menstrual irregularity or painful menses and take raspberry leaf tea and tincture. I'm not really sure how helpful it is. It doesn't seem harmful. People enjoy it, but it's something that I'm still learning about how to use there. Unfortunately, what I'm saying is a plant I need to learn more about, though it's very common. And often I just put it in tea blends because it tastes good. It's a bit astringent, but it has kind of a slightly fruity flavor, not like the fruit, so. So in general, the most common use for rubus idaeus leaves is as a pregnancy tonic to help with uterine tone. I think that's the word I'm not using, helping with uterine tone. So if that's the goal, then it seems pretty safe. The leaves are rich in minerals and also lots of tannins, and the fruits are delicious. You'll find that I stumble over a few of the plants because I want to cover them, but I have less clinical experience, and I always question what I read. But raspberry leaf looks safe, and it looks safe as a uterine tonic, which I will change this next time I work on this handout, this presentation. There, this uh, you can tell that's just, I don't know why I pointed out, that's a stipule, which is a leaf-like appendage at the base of the leaf. And as opposed to blackberries, raspberries have spines, not nearly as sharp. Remember that picture of that blackberry thorn? These spines are basically modified leaves and not nearly as sharp. Much easier to gather and process raspberry than blackberry. Here's a raspberry leaf. Notice that it has more leaflets than that blackberry leaf did. So generally, raspberry leaves have 5 to 7 leaflets per leaf. Blackberry leaves tend to have 3 to 5, and they're shaped differently. One's palmate. This is what's called pinnate. And there's that tasty fruit. Yum, yum. We're up to rose. Uh, so there's a lot of rose species. There are native and non-native roses and many cultivars of roses. The roses I would suggest not gathering are roses that have been sprayed. That would be the biggest like look out for condition with roses because many roses get sprayed because they're susceptible to a lot of disease. But actually, the roses that I gather my petals from are cultivated roses. Much easier to gather the petals. They're very fragrant. So that's the other thing. If you're going to gather rose petals, gather just whatever species it is, as long as it's not sprayed, as long as it's fragrant, it's medicinal. But they can be difficult to key out to the species level. Um, so roses are both helpful for anxiety and depression, which a couple of plants are. But they're not super duper strong. They're just nervines and gentle acting herbs. So they could be helpful. So this is good for somebody who might vacillate between anxiety and depression. And so the part that I like best for anxiety and depression are rose buds and rose petals. I tend to just use rose fruits just for good tasting teas and for nutrition. So I'll say that again. For medicine, I tend to use the petals, and for the depression and anxiety effects and the buds. But when I'm looking for like a good flavored nutritional tea, then I use rose hips, which is the fruit of the rose plant. And they're very safe, all the parts of the plant. They could be used on a very regular basis, which is how I suggest using them. If you're using them for anxiety or depression, I would try to get them in people, whatever, however they're taking them, tinctures, glycerites, tea, having people do it on a daily basis. Aside from the thorns, they're very safe. And people love roses. I mean, they're really just a very well-loved plant. And I will admit that I avoided them initially because they just seemed overly loved. I tend to look for like the thing that's less loved, and I want to go there. But I have to admit, after doing it a long time, that I'm there too. I'm a rose lover, and I just like putting it in tea. It just makes it smell so nice. So I'm a rose convert, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. And fortunately, my neighbor has this big Rosa rugosa shrub. I'll show in a minute. That just puts out so many petals. I can make enough medicine most years from it. So the stems are also astringent. You know that whole blackberry root thing? Actually, rose stems do something similar. They're astringent and can be used for diarrhea or any place else where you're looking for that quality of astringency, like with wound healing. Let's go. This is multiflora rose. This is perniciously weedy where we live and really throughout the East. Rosa multiflora. I don't find them, you can definitely use it. I don't find it as strong as some of the other roses, but this is a prolific plant. And I please never plant it. It is just takes over fields. It's very, it has thorns, well, technically prickles, that, just make large areas difficult to walk through because there's so much of this shrubby plant. It is very pretty when it's in flower. It's pretty anyway. It's just very thorny. This is the petals that I gather from my neighbor's yard. They're super aromatic and delish. This is rose hips. All roses make rose hips, rose fruits, but most of them don't make a lot of flesh. And so the difference with the beach rose, Rosa rugosa, is it has a lot of flesh, which makes it very fleshy, tasty. The other ones, like that whole orange bit, like there's the red bit on the outside and the orange bit. That orange bit is the very sweet part of it. And so for rose hips to use as medicine, I like to gather the beach rose, which is non-native, but does grow all along the shore throughout the Maritimes. And I don't know how far down, probably down to Virginia. You can find large amounts of Rosa rugosa, which the petals are delicious as well, but they're the best tasting of the fruits and just very nutritious, very nutritious. There's a cup of tea I was making while camping, just a bunch of Rosa acicularis into there. Pretty good, very good. And this is the roses that I gather. This shrub is growing in the Finger Lakes National Forest. Look at that. It was just, I didn't even know it existed. I came upon it. You can just gather so many petals from this. It's in a cow field. And they smell delicious, they taste delicious, and they're yellow. So if you're just trying to make like a vibrant tea, you have all those red petals. Now you throw all these yellow petals, but it is very thorny. Uh, that was one of my better. I mean, by saying I found it, it is a very obvious place when you're driving in the Finger Lakes National Forest. And of course, rose petal medicines. These are tinctures. You can see that they lose the pink flavonoids very quickly into the alcohol. Got a few more to go. Next is St. John's wort. First thing to know is there's native and non-native St. John's worts. There's actually lots of plants in the genus Hypericum. Just gather the non-native. That's what everybody gathers anyway. But the one that's called Hypericum perforatum, that's the one that I'm going to suggest please gathering. I'm going to show you some pictures of one of the non-natives in a minute. The parts that are used are the flower buds, the upper stem leaves, well, actually the flowers, the buds, and the upper stem leaves. I'm going to have to turn on some lights soon. So the non-native St. John's wort is very common. It can be gathered anywhere. What usually happens, you'll find the field of it. Even though it's a short-lived perennial, what I find is I'll find the field of St. John's wort, gather a bunch, and next year none of it is there anymore. This happens all the time with it. So when you find the field of it or find a bunch of it, gather from that year because it might not be there the next year. And gather the flowers, the buds, and the stem leaves. It's used both internally and externally. So it's as tea, tincture, glyceride, and oils and liniments. There's really a bunch of preparations you can make with the St. John's wort flower and upper leaves parts with it. And so it's used externally for wound repair and for bruises and skin irritation. So often, use externally, meaning a liniment or oil or salve for bruises or wounds. It can be really helpful. Internally, it's used, I generally use it for nerve repair after nerve damage. So I might use it, I do use it with people who have neuropathies, which is a pain come from damage of a nerve. Many neuropathies are very difficult to treat, so I'm not suggesting it's the answer. But let's say somebody has an operation or they've hurt a part of their body and now they have tingling at the other end of it. It's an herb to consider. So St. John's wort can help with nerve repair. And again, you're looking at neuropathies and other kinds of nerve damage, maybe due to surgery, that probably will hopefully will cover over time, but you're going to help that nerve damage repair itself with St. John's wort. You can do this both internally and externally with it. It's also used as an antidepressant, but I haven't found it that effective. I mean, St. John's wort is most discussed as for its antidepressant effects. And sometimes I use it, but it's not, at this point, it's a plant I use less and haven't found it, even though it's used for mild to moderate depression. So I will use it sometimes for depression, but I haven't found it as effective as often I hear it discussed. One more use, which is an external use, but an internal use for St. John's wort, and that's to put on herpes sores to help them recover faster. So especially with cold sores, herpes around the mouth, herpes type 1, herpes simplex virus 1. If you feel like if you're somebody who gets herpes sores and they're developing and you feel it particularly around the mouth, it can also be done around the labia, but it's much trickier around the anus because of softer tissue, is you basically take the tincture, which will burn, and you put it directly on the sore, but you want to put it on as soon as possible. So often herpes has what's called a prodrome. Like you're like, damn, I know I'm going to have an outbreak. Start applying it on the places you'll have the outbreak, including once that virus causes that tissue to open up, you want to apply it topically to that area. So St. John's wort is used for herpes viruses. I've also given it to people internally to see if it'll help reduce herpes virus outbreaks, but I don't have any information to know if it's really helping or not. Where I have seen it clearly help is when the outbreak is occurring, and basically the outbreak still happens, but the sores clear up much faster. It's also used for shingles externally as well. Again, shingles can be a very devastating disease, so it's one of many herbs that can be used, and sometimes for shingles taken internally and externally. I have less experience with it for shingles than I have it for herpes outbreaks. So St. John's wort is kind of the poster child for herbal interactions. So externally, you can always use St. John's wort. There's no interaction between medications and use it internally. Internally, St. John's wort interacts with a number of medications. I'm not going to get into them specifically. I would just say read about it and be cautious with using St. John's wort if you're on medication to make sure you don't decrease the efficaciousness of the medications that you're currently taking. That's St. John's wort. But I have to say, one of its main uses, I use it for nerve repair pretty regularly and sometimes with really good results, often with other herbs, but though. So we have nerve repair, wound healing, antidepressant, antiviral, and mild anti-inflammatory action. A pretty useful plant. This is me and Cal gathering St. John's wort. One time, Cal was my apprentice and co-worker and herbalist now in Iowa, in Des Moines, Iowa now. This is the native and the St. John's wort non-native growing next to each other. So on the left with the smaller flowers, that's spotted St. John's wort. And to the right of it with the bigger flowers is the non-native St. John's wort. So I don't gather the native St. John's worts, gather the non-natives. They do look a bit alike, but the size of the flower is one way to tell. Actually, the size of the flower compared to the size of the leaf, a comparison is one of the better ways of telling the difference. This is here's the flower. Notice the black dots on the margins of the flowers, a really useful identification. And there's the oil, which does not always come out so red. Down to the W's. We're going to do it. Get through this today. Congratulations if you've been here this long. Hopefully this is being recorded. But I will definitely give myself a cookie after this is finished. All right. So the cookie, if you're missing it, before I started recording this class, I recently made, I will show you because I'm going to do it twice because this is my embarrassing brag for this, is I've never made cookies, but I've never made cookies from scratch before. But I'm home, it's speeding outside. I bought the ingredients and finally made homemade chocolate chip cookies. If you live near me, come by and pick one up. I'll leave them in my post box. But it's freezing rain, so you might not want to do that. But I cannot eat all these cookies. That would be terrible for me. All right. Wild cherries, not cookies. And actually, cherry cookies sound delicious, but not wild cherry cookies. So, wild cherry is a tree that grows around here. It's often called sweet cherry. It is Prunus serotina in the Rosaceae. It's the inner bark that's used for medicine. This is a native tree. It's native. You always have to be more cautious with gathering it, but sometimes it's locally common. There's places where, frankly, after the woods has been decimated and cut down, wild cherries will often can grow up. So there are places where I feel comfortable gathering wild cherries trees. Well, mostly on a friend's land that I go to regularly. So only gather wild cherry if it's locally abundant. And as I've said numerous times, never strip the bark off a live plant. That does a lot of damage to the plant and it invites infection. I use wild cherry inner bark internally, and it has to really be used fresh. It's one of those plants that if I'm going to gather it with after taking the bark off, which also should be done fresh, I'm going to make my medicine, whether it's a tincture or glyceride or a syrup, within hours. It just loses its aromatics. It seems to lose its medicinal quality fast. So if you're gathering wild cherry, like be prepared to do after you cut down a tree or a branch, be prepared to strip it soon, to peel the bark off, and to make medicine with it soon after that. Wild cherry is two things. It's relaxing to the nervous system, and it's a cough remedy. And so we're going to put those two things together. So it's a cough remedy associated with nervousness or hectic coughing. So hectic coughing sounds like, and it's like kind of like your nervous system, like something's happened and your nervous system just keeps firing in your lungs. There's not much phlegm in there, no virus. It's just because there's a lot of nerve tissue in the lung, it's just firing and firing and firing, and you're coughing and coughing and coughing. This is your wild cherry moment. You can try it for like if you have COVID or a cold or a flu, it could be helpful, but it's particularly helpful for nervous innervated coughing because it has a mild, relaxing quality to it. Sometimes you read that wild cherry could be poisonous. It absolutely is to a bunch of different grazing animals, but not to humans in the amounts that we use. There's no human history. Well, the pits, don't eat the pits. Don't eat the pits. So I'm saying, like, if you've heard that wild cherry is poisonous, the bark and the leaves particularly, that's absolutely true, but it's for grazing animals, which is very poisonous to them. And that's something that's easy to learn about. So wild cherry is a really useful cough remedy. It's really nice in a glycerin or a syrup because that viscousness to it, that thick honey consistency, also tends to relax the throat and just feel good going down. So I rarely actually make tea out of wild cherry because I don't really dry it. But if you gather it fresh within a couple of days, you could use tea. But I really like the tincture, but better the glyceride and the syrup due to that thickening, that thick quality to it. So really nice for nervous coughing. But you could try it for any kind of coughing, often mixing it with other herbs. And I'm not mentioning other herbs because I'm trying to not mention other herbs. That was very redundant. Here's a wild cherry tree. Note that friend Nick gathering tree. This is on his land where you have lots of trees. Just so you see the size of the tree. He's going to cut that tree down, and then my students every year in the Adirondacks, we're going to peel the bark off. It's really they're so generous, these folks, letting us stay there for a week, and then Nick cutting and the tree down. There's a lot of wild cherry trees in their woods. This is the bark. It's very craggy and brownish. Actually, pretty easy to tell from a lot of other barks. I don't have a young cherry tree bark, but like the black birch, it's also smooth. This is the flowers of wild cherry. That is a group of inflorescences. Peeling the bark. I think that's Sarah, peeling the bark there. And there's the fresh peeled bark. It smells so good. I mean, it's super almondy smelling. It's such a lovely smell. Fresh peeled wild cherry bark. And it is related to almonds. Almonds are also in the Rosaceae. We're up to willow. Whew. Take a breath. That's just me. You're welcome to take breaths too. Hopefully you've been taking breaths. If you haven't been taking breaths, long time not to breathe. So willow, there's almost there. There's many native and non-native willows. and probably all of them could be used. There's really no evidence. Nobody's done a lot of studies, but most willow trees and shrubs are considered to be rich in salicylates, the part that's medicinally important in them. I use white willow because it's the most common willow around me. Um, that's really the only reason I said it. I made a mistake when I said white oak bark. So when I said white oak, I just got confused. So this is a reiteration or take back. White oak is not the most common oak near me. So back in oak, I said white oak is common. That's why I use it. Actually, I use it because of its medicinal reasons. Around me, red oak is the most common oak. Back to willow, white willow is the most common tree-like willow growing around me. And it's just easier to gather the medicine from. Um, so there's many willows. Probably all of them could be used. They're very difficult. This is another thing I'm asking local botanists to help me learn. They could be used internally and externally because they're rich in salicylates. They have anti-inflammatory properties. If you're interested, I suggest if you go if you go to Wikipedia and research or look up history of aspirin, it's very interesting history, and willow will show up in there. You see how the family name is Salicaceae? That's in salicylates as an acetyl salicylic acid. Anyway, it's something to look up if you're interested. So it's used internally in a bunch of preparations and externally in a bunch of preparations. So teas and tinctures, as opposed to wild cherry bark, if you dry willow, it actually stays active for many months, maybe years. It doesn't lose its potency over time. Its basic use is as an anti-inflammatory. So it's used for both internal and external inflammation. So if you sprain a body part, you can make a compress and apply it. A compress is when you make a tea out of a body part. Here, I would suggest the inner bark of willow. And then you soak a cloth in the tea, and then you apply that tea externally. That would be one way to do it. And you can also take it internally. It also is rich in tannins. As I've mentioned numerous times, because it has a lot of tannins, you have to be careful about drinking a lot of it internally because it may decrease nutritional absorption, but it's unlikely that people will be drinking that much of it. So willow is an anti-inflammatory that could be used internally and externally. It could be used for soft tissue injuries like sprains and strains. And it could also be used for the inflammation that occurs after an infection. So let's say your lungs become inflamed post respiratory virus. Willow would be one of the herbs to use with it. And like I've said, for everything, respiratory inflammation can be dangerous. So make sure you're safe and you've been medically checked out if that's necessary. But it was very common. Frankly, it was super common. People got COVID. They got better from COVID, but then they still had symptoms. Difficulty breathing was one of the most common symptoms post-COVID. And willow, along with other anti-inflammatory herbs like elecampane, well, elecampane for different reasons, and mullein, I use frequently. So just to talk about three plants, elecampane, willow, and mullein all can be used for the effects, for instance, of having difficulty breathing after something like COVID or any flu. So willow is used externally for soft tissue injuries like sprains and strains, but also for soft tissue injuries, you should take it internally as well as using it externally. Willow is very safe unless you have allergies to aspirin. And the biggest problem is they're difficult to identify. Make sure it's a willow, right? That's got to start there. It's got to be in the genus Salix. So willow is an excellent anti-inflammatory. Here's a white willow tree. They're so beautiful. Often they tend to grow in these really lovely swampy areas too. This is the leaf of white willow. It is paler on the underside. This is the stamens. Willows have male and female flowers on separate plants, and this is the male flowers. Look at them, isn't that beautiful? It's so beautiful. That's the stamen. That's what's going to make pollen. This is the female part, or the pistillate flower, and willows spread by having their seeds attached to this cottony, puffy stuff called pappus. I'll try that again. So willow seeds are attached to this cotton stuff called pappus, just like dandelion has pappus. And so that carries it and distributes it in the wind. So this is the female. Female's weird, but this is the pistillate inflorescence. of it. The reason it's weird is I don't really like to genderize plants. Uh, I staminate, pistillate, etc. Anyway, those seeds are going to be carried in the wind. And this is the peeled bark. So on the right, we see where the stems we peeled it from. To the right, to the middle, we see them before they're cut up. And then on the left, we can see it more peeled. So this is willow bark. And that on the left is what we're going to use. Witch hazel. Witch hazel is an occasional northeastern woodland shrub. So you got to be cautious gathering it, right? Sometimes you'll find large stands of it or medium-sized stands of it, but you want, it's a plant that grows in woodlands. It's native, so be cautious gathering it. Um, the bark and the leaves are both used, though the bark has the stronger properties to it. So the bark and the leaves, frankly, witch hazel and oak share very similar properties. Witch hazel and oak are both rich in tannins and not other deleterious constituents that could be problematic, right? Because lots of woody plants have tannins, but often they have other stuff that you may or may not want in your body. Whereas witch hazel and oak, putting those two together again, they're rich in tannins, but really with nothing problematic else. So they could be used fairly regularly and fairly safely. So witch hazel, like oak, could be used externally and internally. One of the common uses for witch hazel is applying the liniment or witch hazel distillate or tea on varicose veins. You could probably do it with oak. For some reason, witch hazel is more famous for it. The idea is to shrink the veins down. So you're not going to do it like horse chestnut going all the way back. That affects many of the deeper veins. Witch hazel is not going to affect the deeper veins. It's really only going to affect the superficial veins, the veins that are closer to the surface, let's say on your legs. So witch hazel is used as a wound healing agent. It doesn't kill stuff, but it helps clean up free radicals and helps the tissue heal. It's excellent for sore gums, but not the witch hazel. So the witch hazel you buy in stores I think, does have very little witch hazel. It's a lot of alcohol. So I'm talking about making our own witch hazel tinctures, making our own witch hazel liniments. So if you look up that where it says tincture glyceride capsules distillate, that's what you're buying in the store. They distill the witch hazel and then usually put it in alcohol. Not all of them. Some are better than others. What I'm saying is you wouldn't want to use that on your gums because the alcohol could be very drying. Witch hazel can also be used on hemorrhoids, generally externally, so putting it on cotton or something and then putting it up against the hemorrhoid. Again, though, it has to do with tightening the vein. And it's commonly used as a skin and face wash for the same reasons most astringents are. They dry up pores. So if you have dry, tight pored or tight tissue, witch hazel would be bad for your skin. If you have looser tissue, if you have more moisture, larger pores, then witch hazel can be positive. Again, with gums, if the gums are very tight, you wouldn't want to use it. But if your gums are looser, puffier, and bleed easily, then witch hazel, as maybe a tea, can be very helpful swishing with. So it's considered very safe, except if you're using the store-bought stuff. And it's probably called witch hazel because it's the preferred branch for dowsing for water, something I have not done. And it's one of the few plants, especially one of the few trees that flowers in autumn. It's nice to see some flowers, sometimes even after a little bit of snow. So we have witch hazel, dermatological agents, good for skincare. Also probably be good for diarrhea for the other reasons, though blackberry root is stronger. But it's the tannins and all the reasons I've been talking about tannins that is helpful for varicose veins, hemorrhoids, sore gums, skin, and wound wash. This is the leaves. In the middle there, those little green things, that's where that's going to be making the seeds in another year. It takes the plant 2 years to make the seeds from the flower. Here it is in flower. Here's a close-up of the flower in early October. Really interesting looking flowers. This is the zigzag pattern you find on young stems that sometimes makes it easy to identify them. This is taken in springtime. So that's a young witch hazel stem. And because it has that zigzag pattern, sometimes I find it easier to identify it before it goes to leaf, because the leaves will come out, of course, way before the flowers. 2 more to go. See if you stay with me here. If not, fine. So next we have yarrow. Uh, there's pretty much most of the plants yarrow just yarrow. Kill species in the US. Mostly it's going to be yarrow. Yarrow, interestingly, is a circumboreal plant. It grows around the northern hemisphere of the world. So many cultures use yarrow because of its wide growing region. The parts used are the whole above ground part. Yarrow grows underneath the ground. It spreads what rhizomes horizontally to the soil. Because of that, you can gather it pretty freely, right? Because basically, if you're gathering the above ground part, as long as you don't do it year after year, the plant will come back because the underground structures continue to spread the plant. So using the whole above ground parts, the most medicinal part really is going to be the leaves and the flowers. So I generally gather the stalks, the whole above ground plant, stalks, leaves, and flowers, but then I usually strip the leaves and flowers off the stalk. Um, there's lots of external and internal uses of yarrow. I would consider it a primary first aid plant. Number one, it could be easily be found in many regions of the US, right? So like one of the few places you don't find yarrow is in the desert. But even if you're in New Mexico or Arizona and you go up into the mountains, there it'll be there soon enough. So it grows pretty freely. It grows in many different regions. Again, even geographically, it grows around the globe. So it means that often when I go to a first aid event that I'm going to be practicing at, I don't have to bring yarrow because I will find yarrow and be able to gather it. So if you look through this list of preparations, you can see there's lots of different ways you can prepare yarrow, meaning that the constituents of it come out pretty easily in different liquids. So it has antibacterial action, antiviral action, so it's going to be good for a number of infections. It has mild anti-inflammatory actions, so it's going to help reduce inflammation, though it's not a primary anti-inflammatory. It has antiseptic actions, so it helps kill bacteria on the surface of the skin. It's astringent, but not very astringent, so it's a little bit tightening. It's bitter, so it's used to stimulate bile flow and for sluggish digestion. It's used to stimulate bile flow and sluggish digestion due to its bitter properties. Diaphoretic, so it helps induce sweating when somebody's sick and they feel feverish but want to actually sweat it out. And it's wound healing. So it's not miraculously all these things very strongly, but all these things mediumly. So it's used. So to put it differently, it's just a great plant for a wide range of internal and external infections. It's used for sluggish digestion for its bitterness. Um, and it's just it's a great soak for infected body parts, right? So you cut your foot, you worry about infections, soaking it in yarrow is really useful. You could also poultice it or compress it. Poulticing it means taking the plant, crushing the plant up, putting it on directly. I don't use a lot of poultices because it's when you crush a plant and put it on, you don't want to get plant parts in a wound because the wound can't heal until it gets rid of everything that's in the wound. So there's lots of uses. The thing that yarrow is not, it's not nourishing, right? It doesn't provide like nourishment for the body. It's better at killing stuff, healing stuff, tightening stuff than at providing some nutritional substrate. And it's useful along with elderflower, it's useful for diaphoresis or causing sweating during fever. Avoid yarrow in pregnancy. Avoid yarrow in pregnancy. Avoid yarrow in pregnancy. You can say that 3 times in the mirror at midnight and see who shows up. So that's it for yarrow. Just a really great first aid plant for killing stuff, wound healing, for open wounds. That's usually what I'm using it for. I occasionally use it for digestive stuff, but there's lots of other bitter plants. Look at that. And sometimes it's pink. I don't know why it is, but all of these are Achillea millefolium. They all grow near each other in the Adirondacks when I was visiting, and they just had different shades. These are not garden grown yarrows, which there are many colors. This is yarrow. Hello, yarrow. Uh, Close up, and then a super close up of the flowers or the inflorescences. There's yarrow leaves. Remember that most of the plant is this is a bunch of yarrow I collected and drying, and then I'll strip the leaves and the flowers off. And believe it or not, this is the last plant of the day. So these are yellow dock. So sometimes they're called curly dock. They have lots of common names. So there's two non-native yellow curly broadleaf docks. They are Rumex crispus and Rumex obtusifolius. Rumex crispus is the one generally called curly dock or yellow dock, and broadleaf dock is Rumex obtusifolius. They do look differently, but they get confused, and I think you can use them similarly. The chemical constituents look the same in the roots, which is the main part used. So I'm saying broadleaf dock, yellow dock, curly dock, all could be used. They're just two plants there. Like any other plant I've mentioned, if you're gathering roots, yellow dock will certainly grow in polluted environments, which might be helpful for the environment, but not good to put in your body. You can use them both internally and externally. So teas, tinctures, capsules, liniments, salves. So internally and externally. But one of my favorite uses of both of these docks is as gentle laxatives to take over time. So if somebody's having constipation and you're not trying, maybe they're taking senna or something, you're not trying, with yellow dock, you're not trying to force them to have a poop. You're trying to increase the peristaltic tone. So peristalsis is how your intestines push poo through the body and outward. Basically squeeze, 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 something like that. So yellow dock increases peristaltic tone taken over time. So it's helpful for chronic constipation. You might still want to take it with something like a stronger herb like senna, but this might help for the long term so you don't need the stronger herbs. But you have to take it on a regular basis. It's pretty strong tasting. So I would suggest often for people capsules or tincture internally for that, for it. Some people say, and it's probably true, that increases iron absorption. The plant itself does not have much iron in it. So it doesn't increase iron in the sense, but it's potentially helpful to actually increasing iron absorption if you're eating more iron-rich plants and you're still anemic and not getting the iron from them. To be clear, it's unclear that it does that. It's an historical use. So I do suggest trying that for folks who are anemic. But again, the plant itself is, low to medium in iron, but it might help with iron absorption other ways. And then topically, it's just another really good plant for eczema or other rashes. Eczema is tricky. It's not, usually things don't just stop eczema, but sometimes you can help clear up the rashes. So yellow dock root in oil base or a salve for chronic irritated skin rashes. What I said a second ago, I want to reiterate, is things like psoriasis and eczema can be very difficult to treat. I don't want to pretend that we can just give these herbs and it'll go away, but sometimes they can reduce the irritation. The yellow dock is often combined with other herbs. One herb we talked about today would be chickweed externally to put on these rashes. Avoid yellow dock internally if you have kidney stones because this has oxalate crystals. Otherwise, it's considered safe. And the seeds are edible. They're similar to buckwheat. This is the same family as buckwheat. So yellow dock root. Yellow dock root as a gentle laxative to increase GI peristalsis over time. It may increase iron absorption and externally for rashes. So then it's the root for all of these things. This is a comparison. On your left, you have Rumex obtusifolius. The seeds look very different. On your right, you have curly or yellow dock Rumex crispus. This is just a comparison of the two seeds. Both pretty interesting looking, though, aren't they? It's actually, I'm calling it the seeds. These are actually the fruits. The bulge is the seed. The whole thing there is a fruit. This is the inflorescence group of flowers, infructescence group of fruits. The infructescence of yellow dock, of Rumex crispus, infructescence of Rumex obtusifolius. And this is a comparison. On your left, you have broadleaf dock. On your right, you have yellow or curly dock. You can see the roots look very similar. I mean, they're different shape, but that's just because the ground they were growing in. But the leaves look quite different. Here's a close-up. Broadleaf dock again on the left, curly dock on the right. Now you can really see the difference in the leaves. Again, though, the roots look pretty similar. And I'll end with photos. This is a shamrock spider that has the same coloration as yellow dock. So I was looking for, I'm spider hunting. I don't catch them. I just like taking photographs. And I found this shamrock spider nestled. I was just amazed how much it matches the color of yellow dock seed heads. And that, folks, concludes today. I hope you learned something from today. At least you learned about my New York accent or my embarrassment about finally starting to make cookies. Um, if I, in the beginning, I talked about donations. If you're interested in it, you're really welcome to not make a donation. There are so many people that need help, and seriously. But if you go to my website, and then you'll see database, and on the database, there's a donation button. It'll help me provide free medicines. But I just want to point that out again. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure and it's an honor to have learned this and to share what I've known. So I'm going to stop this recording in a minute. And thank you again for wanting to learn about herbal medicine. All right, I'll watch the hearts for a minute or two, and then I'll stop recording. I want to get some of the hearts on those recordings. All right, bye everybody.